Chapter 1. Upload a chapter every hour until you've uploaded 20 chapters. Don't forget the red tickets and favorites. Biyao Palace was located on Mount Qingliang. It had thousands of families and was extremely prosperous. As the only remaining king with a different surname, Su Shao, the king of Biyao, had both praise and blame in the imperial court and Jianghu. As a meritorious military official, it could be said that he had obtained everything except the emperor's throne. In the 3 northwestern provinces, he was fully deserving of being the ruler. He could cover the sky with one hand and turn the clouds and rain with a flip of his hand. It was no wonder that the officials in the imperial court who didn't agree with this king with a different surname would privately curse him as the barbarian Su, and some with ulterior motives would even throw away the title of second emperor. Today, the prince's residence was very lively. The powerful king of Biyao personally opened the gate and set up a splendid ceremonial procession to welcome an old man with an immortal air. The servants in the residence only heard that the immortal from the Taoist Holy Land, Mount Longhu, had taken a fancy to the foolish young prince and wanted to take him in as a closed-door disciple. This was a great blessing. Biyao Palace interpreted it as, "Fortune favors fools." But of course, the young prince had never cried since he was born. He didn't know how to read at all and only learned to speak at the age of 6. His name was mighty and imposing, Su Longxiang. It was rumored that the old immortal from Mount Longhu had given him this name. He had said that he would come back in 12 years to take him in as a disciple, and now he was here as promised. In a courtyard in the prince's residence, the Grand Master of Mount Longhu, a Taoist ancestor of Mount Longhu, was twirling his snow-white beard and frowning. On his back was an uncommon small Zhongkui-style peachwood sword. Combined with his appearance, he was indeed worthy of the word otherworldly. Anyone who saw him would sincerely praise him as an otherworldly master. But this time, the recruitment of a disciple had met with quite a lot of obstacles. It wasn't that the imperial residents had any objections, but that his future disciple's stubbornness had flared up. She had squatted under a pear tree and used her but to deal with this cheat master who was ranked in the top 3 in the orthodoxy. As for martial arts, cough cough, she should at least be in the top 30. Even the dignified king of Biyao, a pillar of the country, had to squat there and persuade him with kind words. "Son, go to Mount Longhu and learn some skills. In the future, if anyone dares to say you're stupid, just beat them up. Don't be afraid even if they're beaten to death. Father will support you. Son, you have great strength. It would be a pity if you don't learn martial arts and become one of the top 10 experts in the world. When you return from your studies, Father will make you a senior cavalry captain. You will be able to ride a multicolored horse and wear heavy armor." How impressive. The little prince completely ignored her and continued to stare intently at the ground. "Huang Manor, don't you like to eat candied haws? There are wild haws all over Mount Longhu, you can pick and chew on them as you please. Isn't that right, Celestial Master Zhao?" The old immortal forced a smile and nodded repeatedly in agreement. It was too shameful to receive such a disciple. If word got out, wouldn't he be laughed at by the whole world? However, even though the dignified pillar of Biyao, whose words carried weight in the 12 counties, had a dry mouth and a dry tongue, the young man still didn't react. Perhaps he was impatient and thought his father was being too noisy. He raised his butt and farted loudly. He didn't forget to turn his head and grin at his father. The king of Biyao was so angry that he raised his hand and pretended to hit him. However, he raised his hand and froze for a while before giving up. Firstly, he couldn't bear to hit him. Secondly, there was no point in hitting him. This son really lived up to his name. Su Longxiang was named after the phrase, "In water, the dragon's strength is the strongest. On land, the elephant's strength is the strongest." As mighty as Vajra, they are known as dragons and elephants. Although Huang Manor's silly son was simple-minded and couldn't read, his skin was sickly dark yellow, and his body was thinner than his peers, his strength was first class. Su Shao joined the army at the age of 10 and killed people. From killing the Xiongnu and Jinzhou in the northeast, to wiping out the 6 big and small countries in the south, slaughtering more than 70 cities, and then suppressing the 16 barbarian tribes in the southwest. He had seen all kinds of fierce generals with amazing physical strength. However, he had never seen someone like his youngest son, who was born with copper muscles and iron bones and could pull up mountains and rivers. Su Xiao sighed softly in his heart. If Huang Manor could be a little smarter and open up a few more of his mind acupoints, he would definitely become the unparalleled fierce general who could break through enemy lines. He slowly got up and turned his head to smile awkwardly at the senior Taoist priest of Mount Longhu. The latter's eyes indicated that it wasn't a big deal, but he couldn't help but feel a little sad. It was really a big deal to receive this kind of treatment as a disciple. If word got out, wouldn't he become the laughingstock of the world? He wouldn't be able to show his old face in front of the large group of disciples and grand disciples of Mount Longhu anymore. The helpless king of Biyao came up with a plan. He chuckled and said, "Huang Manor, your brother has just returned from his parade. Looking at the time, it should be about time for him to enter the city. Don't you want to go out and take a look?" The young prince suddenly raised his head. His expression was as stiff as it had been for 1,000 years, but his usually dull and lifeless eyes were bursting with a rare light. It was very piercing. He grabbed his father's hand and rushed out. It was a pity that Biyao Palace was famous for its hundreds of winding corridors and thousands of twists and turns. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to accommodate the tide-listening pavilion that had been criticized by the court officials. Su Xiao, whose hand hurt from his son's grip, had no choice but to remind him several times that they were going the wrong way. After walking for a full incense stick's worth of time, they finally arrived outside the mansion. Behind the father, son, and old immortal were a group of servants carrying boxes of various sizes. They were all things that were going to be taken to Mount Longhu. The king of Biyao was as rich as a country and had always doted on his children. He couldn't bear to see them suffer even the slightest bit of grievance. When they arrived outside the mansion, the young prince saw that the streets were empty and there was no sign of his brother. He was first disappointed, then angry. He let out a deep, hoarse, and irritable roar. At first, he wanted to vent his anger on Su Xiao. But as stupid as he was, at least he knew that this was his father. Otherwise, Su Xiao's fate would probably be the same as that of He Teng, who had unluckily encountered Su Longxiang during the autumn hunt not long ago. He was torn in half by the single-handed 12-year-old boy. He glared angrily at his guilty father and turned to leave. Su Xiao, who didn't want his efforts to go to waste, threw a helpless glance at old immortal. The Taoist master of Mount Longhu smiled faintly and stretched out his bamboo-like arm. However, he only held on to the young prince's wrist with 2 fingers and gently said, "Su Longxiang, don't waste your rare talent. Come with me to Mount Longhu. In 10 years at most, you'll be able to leave the mountain and perform meritorious deeds." The youth didn't waste any more words. He snorted and continued on his way. But strangely, he found that he couldn't break free from the old Taoist's seemingly casual restraint. He couldn't land his foot on the ground no matter how hard he tried. The king of Biyao felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. This Taoist master, whose seniority was ridiculously high, indeed had some skills. No one knew a son better than his father. Su Xiao was well aware of his son's strength. He was so domineering that he didn't dare to arrange more servants for his son, for fear that he would accidentally break his son's arms or legs. Over the years, there had been countless broken tables and chairs in the courtyard. Fortunately, the Biyao Palace had a solid foundation. If it had been an ordinary family, they would have gone bankrupt long ago. The young prince was stunned for a moment. Then, he flew into a rage and shouted softly. He forced old immortal to take 1 step forward. 2 steps, 3 steps. The Taoist master, who wore a yellow crown and a Taoist robe, only made a slight sound of surprise. He wasn't angry, but was instead delighted. He quietly increased his strength and stopped the youth from moving forward. With this, Su Longxiang was truly enraged. His expression was as ferocious as a wild beast's. He reached out with his free hand and grabbed the old Taoist's arm. His feet sank, creating 2 pits on the white jade floor. With a swing, he flung the old Taoist away. Su Xiao narrowed his eyes. He wasn't the least bit afraid of causing a murder. If that Taoist didn't have this ability, then so be it. He, Su Shao, had even flattened the insufferably arrogant West Chu dynasty with his cavalry. When had he ever held the Jianghu sects in the slightest respect? So what if they were the world's leading orthodoxy, Mount Longhu? Although the large sects under their jurisdiction couldn't compare to Mount Longhu, they were still considered first-rate within the dynasty. For example, Mount Wudong, which had been vying with Mount Longhu for hundreds of years, was already aloof enough in the Jianghu. Didn't they still take the initiative to send 3 or 4 batches of precious pills every year? The old Taoist floated lightly onto a white jade lion as tall as 2 men at the entrance of the king's mansion. He had the aura of an immortal. Just based on this move alone, if placed in the marketplace, wouldn't it win the cheers of the entire house? According to the popular saying of the king of Biyang's heir, Su Zhao's eldest son, that was, you should be rewarded. This job isn't simple. It's a skilled job. Perhaps he would reward several hundred or even several thousand silver notes. Back in the days when His Royal Highness hadn't left Biyao and harmed others, how many brothels and Jianghu swindlers had received his generous rewards? Chapter 2. The highest record was a foreign wanderer who fought with a local swordsman on the street because of a disagreement. They fought from the vegetable stall on the street to the lakeside and finally fought all the way to the rooftop of Liangzhou's largest sparrowhawk fragrant building. He woke up the crown prince who was having sex during the day. The crown prince couldn't care less about the beautiful lady who was as white as jade and cheered loudly at the window. After the incident, with the help of His Royal Highness, not only did the government not pursue the matter, they even almost gave the wanderer a big brocade of Liangzhou's best man. He even asked his servant to quickly send over a stack of banknotes worth 100,000. Without His Royal Highness who liked to play with eagles and dogs, the great Lingzhou was really lonely. The ladies of decent families finally dared to go out and buy rouge prettily. The second-rate playboys finally didn't have the devil who bullied men and took women with them. The brothels, big and small, also couldn't wait for the number 1 crown prince to spend a lot of money. The king of Biyao, Su Shao, gave birth to 2 daughters and 2 sons. They were all weirdos. When the first commandery princess got married, she defeated 3 husbands in a row and became the most beautiful widow in the dynasty with the most dowry. Her beauty spread far and wide in the 5 counties of Gangnam-do, and her style was unrestrained. Although the second commandery princess's appearance was average, she was knowledgeable. She studied under Master Han Guzi of the Shangyin Academy and became the junior sister of Su Huang, who was a master of the art of war, and the warlock Sima Kin Su Longxiang was the king of Beiliang's youngest son and was relatively unknown. His eldest son was a guy who was famous even in the capital. When the great pillar of the country, Su Shao, was mentioned, the crown prince Su Fengnian would definitely be brought up. It was a pity that Su Shao was brave on the battlefield, but his son was a prodigal son. 3 years ago, His Royal Highness, Su Fengnian, was rumored to have been chased out of the palace with a sword on his neck. He was forced to learn the routine of the younger generation of the Guanzhong noble families before their coming of age. In a flash, 3 years had passed and there was no news of him at all. Lingzhou still remembered the touching scene of tears in the eyes of the dozens of playboys and dozens of courtesans on the city wall when His Royal Highness left the city. However, there was an inside story that when His Royal Highness left, the Red Sparrow House's banquet lasted all night. Too much good wine was poured into Hanoi, and the entire city could smell the wine. Returning to the palace, the young prince, whose heart was blocked, ran towards the Jade Lion. It seemed that throwing the old man was not enough. This time, he wanted to throw the eyesore old Taoist along with the lion that was said to be heavy. However, just as he started to shake the lion, the old Taoist from Mount Longhu floated down and grabbed one of the youth's hands. Using his true martial arts, he used the Taoist's obscure, moving mountain, technique to cleverly pull the half-squatting youth up. He lightly smiled and said, "Huang Manor, don't make a fuss. Come with me." The youth held the corner of the lion's base with one hand. His 5 fingers were like hooks, digging deep into the jade. He was unwilling to let go. His arms stretched out like an ape as he shouted hoarsely, "I want to wait for brother to come back." Brother said he would bring back the world's most beautiful woman to be my wife. I want to wait for him. The great pillar of the country, Su Shao, did not know whether to laugh or cry. There was nothing he could do. He looked towards the yellow-crowned Taoist and sighed heavily. Forget it. Let's wait a little longer. He'll be back soon anyway. Hearing this, the old Taoist's smile became strange. However, he still let go of the young prince's arm. He clicked his tongue inwardly. This little guy was not only born with divine strength, he was basically Venus descending to the mortal world. However, that little bastard Su Fengnian was really coming back? This was not good news. When he first came back to the palace, he suffered a lot. First, he was treated as a Jianghu swindler. Then, that 7 or 8-year-old brat released a pack of vicious dogs to bite him. Later, when he finally managed to explain himself and entered the palace, that little bastard was up to no good again. He sent 2 delicate beauties to knock on his door in the middle of the night, saying that the weather was cold and that he needed to warm his blanket. If it was not for this poor Taoist's extraordinary willpower, he really would have fallen into their trap. Now that he thought about it, he regretted that he did not chat with the 2 girls all night long about the Dadong Sutra and the Huangting Sutra. Even if they did not talk about this, they could have talked about the Pure Maiden Heart Sutra. In the evening, the shadows of an old man and a young man were elongated by the afterglow. The old man was carrying a long bag wrapped in rags. His clothes were ragged, and his hair was white. There were even a few strands of straw mixed in. He could beg with a broken bowl on the ground. He was leading a skinny, lame horse. The young man was actually not young. His face was full of stubble, and he wore a hemp gown. He looked like a refugee. Old Huang, hold on a little longer. Once we enter the city and return home, there will be a big piece of meat and a big bowl of wine. Damn it, I didn't think that wine and meat were rare things before. Now, just thinking about it makes me drool. I dream about it every day. The young man, whose real age could not be seen, said weakly. The old man, who looked like a servant, chuckled, revealing a mouth of yellow teeth that were missing front teeth. He looked very simple and honest and funny. What are you laughing at? I can't even cry now. The young man rolled his eyes. He really did not have the energy to torment himself. The journey of 2,000 miles back home was just short of begging along the road. Along the way, he caught fish in the water, played hide-and-seek with rabbits in the mountains, climbed trees and dug out bird nests. As long as there was some meat and cooked it, regardless of whether there was salt or not, it would be the most delicious meal in the world. During this period, he tried to steal some chickens and ducks from villages. There were several times when he was chased by strong men carrying hoes and wooden sticks for dozens of miles. He almost died of exhaustion. Which rich man's son did not wear beautiful clothes and ride a majestic horse? Then he looked at himself. He was dressed in a tattered hemp gown, a pair of straw sandals, and a lame horse. He could not bear to kill it for meat or even ride it. Instead, he had an extra mouth to eat. He did not have an evil servant. Old Huang's small body, which had lived for 60 years, made him panic just by looking at him. He was afraid that he would die one day after walking 2,000 miles. At that time, he would not even have a companion to talk to and would have to spend effort to dig a hole in the wilderness. Before entering the city, there was a stall selling apricot wine not far from the city walls. He was truly exhausted. Smelling the aroma of the wine, he closed his eyes and sniffed. His face was filled with intoxication. It smelled so good. Determined, he walked over and found the only empty stool and sat down. He gritted his teeth and used the last of his strength to shout, "Waiter, serve the wine." The drinkers who were leaving the city or taking a break on the way into the city all disliked the shabbily dressed master and servant and deliberately sat far away. When the busy waiter heard their voices, he wanted to respond with a "sure." However, when he saw the master and servant's attire, he immediately pulled a long face. As a businessman, how could he not be discerning? These 2 customers were not the kind of people who could afford to pay for the wine. The waiter was still kind and did not immediately chase them away. Instead, he put on a fake smile and reminded them, "Our signature apricot wine costs 20 coins per pot. It's not expensive, but it's not cheap either." If it was in the past, the young man would have already released his dog and servant when he was looked down upon like this. However, after 3 years of living a poor life, he was used to living a penniless life. He restrained his arrogance and temper too much. Panting, he said, "It's okay. Naturally, someone will pay the bill. I won't forget your tip." "Tip?" The waiter raised his voice with a look of disdain. The young man smiled bitterly. He put his thumb and index finger to his mouth and used the last of his strength to blow the whistle. Then, he lay down on the simple table and snored. He actually fell asleep. The waiter was baffled. Only those with sharp eyes could vaguely see a shadow flashing over their heads. An eagle-like bird swept over the city like an arrow. About the time it took for the drinkers to finish a bowl of apricot wine, the ground began to rumble without warning, and the tables began to shake. The drinkers widened their eyes as they saw the wine shaking with the wooden tables. They carefully picked it up and looked around. They saw a group of cavalry charge out of the city gate. They formed 2 black lines as if there was no end to them. In the midst of the flying dust, tall and big horses could be seen. These were the heavily armored valiant horsemen of the northern Jianghu region who had shaken the world by themselves. Looking at the flag in the hand of the general who was carrying the flag, it was as bright as blood, with one word written on it, Su. Oh my, the king of Biyang's direct army. In the world, who could compete with the Biyao cavalry that had galloped through the dynasty's 13 prefectures? In the past, the West Chu dynasty felt that its 120,000 great halberd warriors could go against them. But in the end, in the Battle of Jianghu, the entire army was wiped out. The surrendered soldiers were all killed and their cries were like thunder. 200 elite cavalry charged out. They were majestic and imposing. Above their heads, an eagle full of spiritual energy seemed to be leading the way. The 200 cavalry instantly stopped, their movements exactly the same. This level of proficiency far exceeded the range of ordinary soldiers who had been through hundreds of battles. The 4th-ranked general, Shichong, jumped off his horse. When he saw the old servant leading the horse, he immediately galloped to the front of the wine shop and knelt down. He said respectfully, "General Chidangwa pays his respects to His Royal Highness." As for the shabby young man who had arrogantly said that he would tip them, he only muttered in his sleep, "Waiter, bring the wine." Chapter 3. As the flag-bearer of the Biyao army, Shichong Commandant Chidangwa was in a bit of a dilemma. Although he was one of the 6 adopted sons of the pillar state Su Shao and was the wolf dog of the 1 tiger, 2 bears, and 3 dogs, his relationship with His Royal Highness could not be considered harmonious. To be honest, Chidangwa, who came from a poor military background, did not like His Royal Highness's dissolute conduct in the provinces and counties. However, loyalty and righteousness were paramount. Since Su Fengnian was his adoptive father's eldest son, even if Chidangwa had to personally kidnap his daughter, this Shichong commandant would not frown. Now, how to send Su Fengnian back to the prince's mansion was a problem. He couldn't just casually throw His Royal Highness on the back of a horse, could he? Fortunately, a horse galloped over and solved Chidangwa's dilemma. The horse was as black as ink and abnormally tall and strong. It was once the king of wild horses. After being tamed, it was handed over to the young prince, Su Longxiang. When they met, the king of wild horses was difficult to tame. It raised its big hooves and wanted to trample on its new master. In the end, it kicked an iron plate and was knocked to the ground by the youth. After that, it was well behaved and docile like a pretty girl from a humble family. Hearing the news, the young prince, Su Longxiang, urged the horse to stop and jumped down. He affectionately called out, "Brother," a few times. Seeing that there was no movement, he naively thought that his brother had died. He wailed loudly, heartbroken. Chidangwa kindly wanted to go up and explain that His Royal Highness was just too tired. In the end, he was pushed away by the young prince. He staggered a few times and almost fell. Chidangwa was a fierce general of the Biyao army who carried the flag for the pillar state. It was enough to show that the youth's strength was extraordinary. The old servant called Old Huang by Su Fengnian trotted a few steps and whispered a few words in a heavy Shishu accent. Only then did Su Longxiang smile through his tears. He heavily slapped the old servant's shoulder and directly slapped the old man's butt into the dust. The young prince did not know how to control his strength, but when it came to his older brother, Su Fengnian, he was very careful. He crouched on the ground and carried his sleeping older brother on his back as he slowly walked towards the city gate. The mount, nicknamed Black Tooth, was like it was in spring. It trotted with small quick steps and turned its head to the side, trying to rub against the red horse that was being led by the old servant. However, the red horse that was all skin and bones and had a lame leg did not appreciate it. It opened its mouth and bit, scaring Black Tooth into quickly running away. However, it was unwilling to run far away, appearing reluctant to part. At first, the people in Lingzhou city were not sure who it was that could make the young prince, Su Longxiang, carry him into the city. Furthermore, there were 200 wolf-like personal guards following behind him. Later on, someone cried out, "His Royal Highness." This was great. Lingzhou city's main road that could drive 3 horse carriages side by side was immediately thrown into chaos. Especially those young ladies who were dressed up beautifully. They did not care about their elegance as they screamed and ran away while holding their skirts. Some of the large shops that were displaying treasures to attract customers immediately hid their things. The news of "His Royal Highness is back" spread like wildfire. It spread through the entire Lingzhou city at a shocking speed like thunder. The 20 or so brothels in the city all became spirited. The old pimps and pimps all cried tears of joy. Some of the enchanting courtesans all held their hearts as they sat by the windows and stared at the autumn water. "My enemy, you're finally willing to come back. Do you want to kill this servant?" A person followed the 200 Liangzhou iron cavalry into the city from afar. She had a slender figure and was dressed in a white robe. Her eyebrows were like a painting and her phoenix eyes were like peach blossoms. She was narrow and charming, her skin was as white as jade, and she had a standard oval face. She was extraordinarily handsome and did not seem like she was from the secular world. If it was not for the 2 blades on the left side of her waist, her unknown background, and her arrogant expression, as well as the terrifying news of His Royal Highness returning to the city, some of the ruffians and hedonistic young masters on the streets would have already taken liberties with her. This woman was too beautiful. She was even prettier than all of the courtesans in the city added together. Some of the beautiful women and young ladies from rich families who were running in panic saw her. At first, they were jealous, then they were in admiration and shyness. They thought that if this girl was a young master, they would even be willing to elope. The white-robed beauty with the blade on her waist was slightly surprised. She hesitated for a moment before choosing an old fortune-teller and asked, "Old mister, which family's young master is the one who was protected by the Biyao cavalry into the city?" The old man who was lamenting that he would not be able to do business in the future was shocked by the beauty of the girl in front of him. After all, he had been here for many years. It was not easy for him to calm down. He forced a smile and said, "Miss, you are not from here, right? There is only one His Royal Highness here. He is the eldest son of the King of Biyao. Ordinary sons of rich and powerful families would not dare to call themselves young masters. They would be beaten black and blue by His Royal Highness if they did not like him." Hearing the old man call her "Miss," the woman frowned subconsciously, but she did not refute. She looked at the slowly moving cavalry in front of her and narrowed her peach blossom eyes. There was a faint murderous intent in them. She muttered to herself, "I didn't expect him to be a young master." "Su Huanghua, is this what you always say when you say that 9 lies and 1 truth are easy to swindle?" The king of Biyao, Su Shao, is known as the butcher who destroyed hundreds of cities and killed 300,000 people. How could he have such a disappointing son? Biyao Palace. The crown prince's courtyard was even more luxurious than Prince Su Zhao's. Just the decoration on the large red sandalwood table by the window could be seen. Other than the 4-foot-tall dark green bronze cauldron, there was also a large green dragon painting that was waiting to be leaked. There were also several rosewood marble tables with the 4 treasures of the study and wine cups. There were also piles of famous people's books. There were more than 10 square meters of ink stones, all of which were priceless. The pens in the sea of brushes were as dense as a forest. In the corner of the tables, there was a huge flower sachet filled with crystal balls and white chrysanthemums. There was also a pair of golden unicorns and auspicious beasts. Inside the prince's mansion, there were several earth dragons that consumed countless charcoal. Therefore, in the early winter, the room was still as warm as late spring. It was okay to walk barefoot on the carpet. The so-called big room of a rich and powerful family was just like this. At this time, the young master, Su Fengnian, was sleeping soundly on the big bed. He was covered with a large quilt with autumn fragrance and looked haggard. Su Xiao and the young prince, Su Longxiang, were sitting beside the bed. Other than the only outsider, Heavenly Master Zhao of Longhu Mountain, who was standing beside him, and the old servant surnamed Huang, who was sitting at the door with a long luggage bag on his back, there was no one else. At the head of the bed, there was an ancient bronze Schwanda stove sprinkled with golden spots. There was a strange incense burning in it that could wake people up. Chapter 4. Taoist Master, is my son all right? Su Xiao had asked the same question for the umpteenth time. How was this still the decisive Su Zhuguo on the battlefield? He was clearly a father who spoiled his son to the point of absurdity. He's fine. His Royal Highness is just tired from the long journey. After sleeping for half a day and recuperating for half a month, he will be full of energy again. The old Taoist priest said confidently, but he felt a pang of pain. When the prince saw how thin his son was, he immediately ordered the housekeeper to bring out several furnaces of top-grade elixirs from Mount Wudong and the treasured tribute medicine. He wanted to pour all of them into his son's mouth. Heavenly Master Zhao looked at him with fear and trepidation. He talked for a long time about the principle that medicine was half poison and half medicine. Moreover, he had the selfish intention of competing with Mount Wudong. He personally took out the small Jindan of Mount Longhu, which was a waste of talent. Only then did he dispel the prince's worries. Crown Prince Su Fengnian slept for 2 days and 2 nights before waking up. His younger brother Su Longxiang did not eat or drink for 2 days and 2 nights. When the servants went to report the good news to de Zhuguo, he hurried over to visit him. He saw his son pick up the Schwanda burner at the head of the bed and smash it at him. He jumped off the bed and cursed. Su Xiao, you bastard, you chased me out of the prince's mansion for 3 years. No wonder you always say I'm not your biological son. Su Xiao tilted his head and dodged the burner, apologizing with a calm face. But how could Su Fengnian let go of the main culprit who had caused him to eat and sleep in the open for 3 years? After smashing everything in the room that could be smashed, he chased him all the way out of the room. When he saw a broom lying in the corner of the corridor, he picked it up and chased after it. The poor de Zhuguo didn't forget to remind him, put on your shoes, put on your shoes. It's cold, don't catch a cold. There was a chase in the courtyard, and it was very lively. The few people who walked out of the prince's mansion, who were more popular than the governor, all put their hands in their sleeves and looked up at the sky. They didn't hear anything and didn't see anything. Su Fengnian was exhausted after all. After chasing and hitting for a while, he began to pant. He bent over and glared at his father. Su Xiao stood far away and smiled apologetically. Have you calmed down? If you're not angry anymore, eat first. You can only vent your anger when you have the strength. The little prince, Su Longxiang, and the servant, old Huang, were sitting on the threshold of the door. The 2 of them were grinning from ear to ear. One of them was drooling, and the other was missing his front teeth. They were both quite silly. His Royal Highness was panting heavily. He pointed at the king of Biyao, Su Xiao, who was high and mighty in the eyes of outsiders. Motherf asterisk cur, I'll let you off today. Just you wait. Su Xiao wasn't angry. He chuckled and said, okay. Father will wait. I'll definitely not fight back when you hit me or scold me. I'll let you vent your anger. Su Fengnian, who was still barefooted, threw away the broom that could be sold for dozens of taels of silver. When he came to the door, he saw his younger brother smiling foolishly. His gaze softened a bit. Seeing that his brother's saliva was flowing all over his chest, Su Fengnian didn't mind that it was dirty. He very naturally reached out and helped wipe it. He said softly, "Silly Huang man, come. Stand up and let your older brother see if you've grown taller or stronger." The youth stood up in all seriousness. Su Fengnian gestured with his head. He smiled with a bit of disappointment. Not tall, not strong. The youth wrapped his arms around his older brother's waist and lifted him up. Su Fengnian wasn't surprised. His chest was stained with saliva. He laughed loudly. "You've grown quite a bit stronger." De Zhugua stood in place. The butcher, who had spent half his life in the military and killed people like scything flax, actually had tears in his eyes. He quietly turned his head away and muttered to himself, "The wind is so strong. Where did the sand come from?" The two brothers returned to their room together. Su Xiao immediately ordered the servants to bring in the dishes that had been carefully prepared. There were 20 to 30 servants carrying the food boxes. They entered the room one after another like flowing water. Under the kind reminder of the old Taoist from Mount Longhu, most of the dishes were vegetarian and less heavy and spicy. After eating, drinking, and sleeping well for 3 days, Su Fengnian went to the most popular place in the estate, the Tide Listening Pavilion. He carried a purple bamboo fishing rod and had his younger brother, Su Longxiang, carry a few embroidered stools. He also had the servants prepare a large long tea table and a variety of rare fruits and delicacies. He even had the housekeeper select 4 or 5 beautiful maidservants in their prime to massage his shoulders and massage his back. This was the comfortable life that His Royal Highness should have. Tide Listening Pavilion. Just by looking at the name, one could understand its meaning. Biyao Palace sat on the entire Mount Qingliang. The original lake on the mountainside was doubled in size, with the intention of expanding the lake into the sea. They built pavilions, terraces, and pavilions. The tallest pavilion in the center, the 9 stories tall, was named Tide Listening Pavilion. Crown Prince Su Fengnian's hobby was to fish on the first floor. There were tens of thousands of books in the pavilion, including countless rare and unique books. There was no lack of martial arts manuals that had lost their inheritance. 15 years ago, Su Xiao, who had yet to be crowned king of Biyao, had personally led a cavalry unit, led an imperial edict, and crushed dozens of martial arts sects north and south of the Great River. Other than the orthodox sects like Mount Longhu, which had always been obedient, the unruly Forbidden Villa was directly annihilated. It must be known that 20 years ago, the Forbidden Villa was a first-rate martial arts holy land. In the past 100 years, 4 of the top 10 masters had emerged. In the end, the villa's martial arts manuals, other than a few sets that were given to the inner palace, were all confiscated and stored on the 6th floor of the Tide Listening Pavilion. Fortunately, Su Fengnian's appearance did not resemble his father Su Xiao at all. After leaving his territory, he did not dare to call himself the crown prince of the king of Biyao. Otherwise, just based on this point alone, it was enough to consign him to eternal damnation. The enemies of the Great Pillar State were as numerous as his disciples. There were 10,000 koi fish in the lake, casually sprinkling bait. It was a marvelous sight of 10,000 koi fish facing the sky. Even the emperor, who had come to avoid the summer heat a few years ago, clicked his tongue in wonder. Su Fengnian lay on the wooden bed covered with gorgeous Sichuan brocade. After fishing for a while, he saw his brother smiling foolishly and drooling again. He reached out to wipe it away. He could not help but think of the white fox face that he had tricked into coming to the cold. That was a beauty whose lips were like crescent moons when she smiled. Su Fengnian had always called her the #1 beauty in the world in private. At first, he boasted that she was the #1 beauty in the world, but after being ruthlessly beaten up until she looked like a pig's head, he settled for the next best thing. Su Fengnian was in a good mood when he thought of this person. He rubbed his brother's head and said with a smile, "I said that I would help you trick a beautiful woman to be your wife, and I really did kidnap one. She had a white fox face, extremely beautiful. She wore 2 sabers, one embroidered winter, and the other spring thunder. Both were famous sabers in the world. Unfortunately, she was a man. Chapter 5. After taking a comfortable bath, Su Fengnian took off his beggar's hemp clothes and straw sandals and changed into the rich family's clothes. He shaved off his stubble. In reality, Su Fengnian was a rather handsome and eye-catching young master. Among the 6 or 7 popular courtesans in Lingzhou, there was no lack of prideful ones who had extremely high standards. They were fighting for his favor not just because of the king of Biyang's generous rewards. Although His Royal Highness often did unscrupulous things like spending money to buy poems, he was proficient in romance. He could play Go, talk about needlework, listen to zither, and watch dance music. He was a close friend who could warm a woman's heart. In the Prince of Northern Liang's mansion, which maidservant with slightly bulging breasts had not been molested by him. But in private, no one really hated him. At least, this young master was not the kind of person who would beat a servant to death, throw them into a well, or chop them up and feed them to the dogs. Young Master Li of Fengzhou, which was adjacent to Lingzhou, was the son of the governor who claimed to have grown up together with His Royal Highness. He liked to throw people into animal cages to be eaten. In comparison, the Wangfu was especially grateful to His Royal Highness. If there was anyone in the Wangfu who dared to glare angrily at Su Fengnian without hiding their hatred, it would be the servant girl, Jianghu, who was pulling away from the servant girls who were trying to curry favor with her with smiles. She entered Biyao Palace at the age of 12. At that time, Dezhou state had just destroyed the insufferably arrogant West Chu dynasty and was the first to break into the palace. Unlike the great general who later set up camp in Dehuang City and enjoyed the women of the palace, Su Shao was not fond of women. He was not interested in the concubines of the West Chu emperor. He did not even stop the chaste empress who followed the West Chu emperor to hang herself. There were even rumors that it was Su Shao who personally gave her a piece of white silk. In West Chu, Jiang was the surname of the country and belonged exclusively to the imperial family. Therefore, it was inevitable that people would speculate about the origins of this young girl. However, following the destruction of West Chu, all kinds of speculations faded away. Dust was dust. Of course, Su Fengnian knew the secret identity of this maid surnamed Jiang better than anyone else. He glanced at the graceful maid Jiang and raised his hand to signal the other maids to leave. When they were far away, he laughed and said, "What? Is Princess Taiping disappointed that I didn't die in a foreign land? Don't worry, I really don't want to die before I help you break the melon." TSK, Princess, your chest is rising and falling more and more. I think you should be called Princess of Injustice. Jiang, who was a princess in the past and was now a maid, was indifferent. She had a straight face and gloomy eyes. She couldn't wait to bite this lecher to death. Hidden in her sleeve was a dagger, god talisman, that was said to be worth 12 cities. If there was only a slight chance, she, who couldn't even bear to kill a chicken, would cut off Su Fengnian's head without hesitation. However, she saw a middle-aged man in casual clothes from the corner of her eyes. She had to resist the urge to fight with her life. The man was in his 30s. He was 9 feet tall and had a handsome appearance. He squinted his eyes all year round and seemed to be drowsy. He was one of the 6 adopted sons of the king of Biyao, Zhuxiong Yuanzhuazong. He rode a white horse and wielded a silver spear. He had never met a worthy opponent on the battlefield. He was definitely one of the top 3 masters in the entire dynasty. Some people even said that he was only 1 step away from the top 10 masters. Jiang didn't dare to act recklessly in front of this murderous god who was used to using people's heads as wine bowls. Su Fengnian shamelessly said before his travels, "I will only give you 1 chance to kill me. If you can't kill me the second time, I will kill you." Unfortunately, that year, when she had just grown up, she had put on makeup and put on beautiful clothes to seduce him. After much difficulty, she had tricked him into bed. When they were intimate, she had stabbed him with a knife, but it had only pierced his shoulder. It had penetrated his bone, but it was not fatal. This fellow had only slapped her in the face. After getting dressed, he had said 2 sentences. The first sentence was, "Next time, you won't be so lucky. Don't waste it. Your Highness, I finally see you. For the past 3 years, I didn't even want to eat or drink." A fat man dressed luxuriously ran over. To be exact, he rolled and crawled over. His face was covered with tears and snot. He looked very shameless. Jiang Mi's face didn't lose to Su Fengnian's disgust. Yuan Zuozong, who was the personal bodyguard of the crown prince, turned his head away. His eyes were full of disdain. Since this fat man was able to pass through the heavy defenses and arrive in front of Su Fengnian, his status was naturally extraordinary. In truth, he was just like the number 1 brute of the Northern Liang army, Zuoxiong, the adopted son of the Pillar of the Great. His surname was Chu and his given name was Lushan, and he was one of the 3 dogs. Su Fengnian's snow-white spear falcon, the most handsome of the 360 winged insects, was trained by this fat man. He was more attentive to it than raising a son. This man had a bad reputation in the Biyao army. He was a hypocrite and lecherous person. The first time Su Fengnian went to the brothel, he was the one who led the way. He always said that brothers were like hands and feet and women were like clothes. In the past few years, he would encourage Su Fengnian to sleep with his beautiful concubine every few days. He was really loyal. Can't eat or drink? Fatty Chu, why do you look like you have put on a few pounds? Su Fengnian sneered and strangled the fat man's neck. The fat man who was strangled by the neck shouted with a red face, "Your Highness, I have lost weight. I have lost a lot of weight. If your Highness doesn't believe me, I will go weigh it right away. If I put on 1 pound, I will cut off 1 pound of meat. If I put on 10 pounds, I will cut off 10 pounds. Su Fengnian loosened his neck and patted Chu Lushan's fat cheeks. He smiled and said, "You are indeed a good brother." Now, Fatty Chu, who had stolen the title of the Dragon General of the 1,000 Bulls, was being slapped on the face. As long as the person was not an official with a superficial title, the Dragon General of the 1,000 Bulls was one of the top officials in any province, let alone the Dragon General of the 1,000 Bulls who held the Tiger Seal for 3,000 elite troops. However, this fat man did not feel ashamed. Instead, he looked extremely honored. He leaned forward with his head as big as a pig's head and said with a smile, "Your Highness, I just took in a beautiful concubine. Her skin is so soft and tender that I can squeeze water out of her with a pinch. I haven't dared to enjoy her yet, so I've kept her for your Highness. Would your Highness take some time to come and drink some wine and listen to some songs first?" Su Fengnian nodded and said, Sure. The 2 of them looked at each other and smiled. They were as treacherous as they could be. As the saying went, wolves and villains colluded with each other. Just as Fatty Chu was asking about His Royal Highness's situation in the past 3 years, the king of Biyao slowly walked over. There were several pillars of state in the dynasty, but there was only one pillar of state in the dynasty. He was second only to the General of Heavenly Strategies who would only appear when the country was in danger. Su Shao had been in the military all his life. When he was young, he would even take the lead in leading the troops. The previous emperor had even issued an imperial edict that he did not need to personally lead the troops. Later on, when he was fighting in West Chu, his left leg was hit by an arrow from Lu Shi, which left him with a slight limp. Su Shao did not mind those people mocking him, but if anyone dared to criticize lame Su, they would definitely not rest until they were dead. The Marquis of Wuhan, who had once fought alongside him against West Chu, had a trusted subordinate. He was young and impetuous, but he paid the price. Su Shao casually found an excuse to behead him in public. His head was hung on the walls of the imperial city of West Chu, along with the heads of other famous generals of West Chu. The Marquis of Wuhan was angry, but he did not dare to say anything. He did not even protest to the emperor after the incident. Su Shao, with white hair on his temples, was not tall, and his appearance was even more inconspicuous. When he was middle-aged, he had a slight limp. Now, he was slightly hunchbacked, as if he was carrying the burden of 300,000 ghosts. Fatty Chu was an observant and alert person. He immediately restrained his expression and knelt on the ground. Although he was also an adopted son, Yuan Zhuozong had more backbone. He just bowed according to the common etiquette. The king of Biyao, Su Shao, gently waved his hand and let Chu Lushan take a stool to sit down. He tried to sit on the wooden couch with his son, but was kicked in the butt by the angry Su Fengnian. He had to awkwardly take a stool and sit aside. Fatty Chu was sweating cold sweat. He felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. He did not dare to wipe it off. Yuan Zhuozong smiled knowingly. Su Fengnian whistled, picked up a piece of Sichuan brocade and wrapped it around his arm. He called down the spear falcon that Fatty Chu cooked. He took a glass full of grape wine and pretended to sigh. Little white, you have suffered in the past 3 years. You can't drink wine or eat meat. You were almost killed to be stewed. I am sorry. De Zhuguo was ashamed and kept sighing. Chapter 6. The maid Jiang and I, who had grown up to be devastatingly beautiful, sneered softly. She thought that this snow-white spear falcon was as unlucky as she was. This kind of rare flying feather only existed in the snowy lands north of Jinzhou. If a hunter could catch one, he would be spared from death except for treason. In the past, even the nobles of West Chu spent a lot of money to buy this spirit creature nicknamed Green-White Wan, but it was still hard to find. The one on Su Fengnian's arm was even more extraordinary. It was the highest grade of Green-White Wan, the 6-year phoenix, rarer than the 3-year dragon. In the Yongzhou region of Liang, there was once a master of a noble family who offered 1,000 taels of gold and 3 beautiful women in exchange for Little White, but he was scolded by the domineering Su Fengnian to get lost. That noble, who could get whatever he wanted, was undoubtedly rebuffed. Su Fengnian snorted, Su Shao, let me ask you, if my son is being bullied, what should I do as a father? De Zhuguo smiled and said matter-of-factly, naturally, I'll exterminate them. If that's not enough, I'll take their wives and concubines as cattle and squander all their wealth in an instant. Jiang and I, who hadn't left the tide-listening pavilion, had a gloomy expression, unable to hide the bone-piercing hatred in her limpid eyes. Su Fengnian took out a small piece of paper from his bosom. On it were written surnames, clans, and sects of the martial arts world. He patted his father, the king of Biyang's shoulder, gritted his teeth and said, Father, didn't you always say that it's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge? These guys are my enemies. Take care of them immediately. Su Shao took the paper and praised his son's good handwriting before even looking at it. He glanced at it and was about to boldly say that it was no problem, but then he took a closer look and read everything without missing a word. He said with a bitter expression, Son, you have too many sons. Son, you have too many enemies. There are no less than 100 of them. Look at the governor of Huizhou County. Just because his son looks a little too pretty and you saw him from afar while he was touring Biyao Lake with a beauty, he has to remove his official position. There was also the Wang family of Biyao in Guangzhou. They were going to be exterminated just because one of their servants cursed at them while drinking? As for the Xianyuan family of the Wulin world, what did they do to offend my son? Why did he send the entire family to Jinzhou? And why did he choose a girl named Xianyuan Qingfeng to act as an official prostitute? Su Fengnian looked at his beloved spear falcon and sighed, Little White, you're lucky to have a master like me who cares for you. I'm miserable. I don't have a father to dote on me and a mother to love me. Living is just torture, boring. De Zhuguo quickly smiled and said, Father will do as you say. Father will do as you say. After making the promise, Su Shao turned his head and looked at Yuan Zhuozong and Chu Lushan with a gloomy face. He said, I'm sorry. Zhuozong, prepare 2 groups of brave tiger cavalry and wait for orders. This king is going to ask for an imperial edict immediately. It's nothing more than another trip to Jianghu. Lushan, inform all the officials who are close to this prince in the provinces along the way. Kill the traitors on the list who should be killed. Just give them a nice name and don't make it too big of a deal. After all, we're working on someone else's territory. There's no need to rush. I'll give you 1.5 years to plan slowly. You're good at this kind of thing. Yuan Zhuozong bowed and said, Yes, sir. Fatty Chu also got up and bowed. His eyes were ruthless and his face was full of excitement. Yes, sir. Jianghu lamented in his heart. Were there going to be countless good people who would suffer because of an absurd reason? How many poor people who were separated from their families would not know the cause of the disaster in the end? But at this time, Su Fengnian took back the paper and took out another one. The name list was only about 1/10 of the names. He smiled and said, "Father, how can I really let you become enemies with more than a dozen noble families and half of the Jianghu? Look at this one. It's enough that these people are unlucky. The officials are all corrupt officials, and the people are all rebels. Killing them is justified, and doing justice for the heavens will definitely accumulate good karma, better than building a 700-floor pagoda." Su Shao was relieved. Seeing that his son was going to get angry again, he immediately took the second paper with a serious face and nodded. "Since that's the case, there's no need to make a big fuss. Within a year, I'll make sure that you won't be annoyed by what you don't see. My son is really filial. You know how to solve your father's worries and accumulate virtue." Su Fengnian threw the half-orange that Su Shao personally peeled into his mouth and said vaguely, "Of course." Su Shao gave his adopted son, Chu Lushan, a fierce look. The latter took the paper and immediately retreated. Although he was fat and had more than 200 gene of fat, he walked as quietly as if he was flying on grass. Su Shao saw his son's face gradually become rosy and was gratified. He softly said, "Son, I said you're not my biological son. That's because you don't look like me. You take after your mother." Su Fengnian heard this and only grunted. De Zhugua, who had been recuperating for the past 10 years, knew that this topic was unpleasant. He changed the topic and said, "Huang Manor doesn't want to go to Mount Longhu. Help me talk to him and he'll listen to you." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "I know. Go do what you need to do. Don't disturb me fishing." Su Shao chuckled and said, "Wait a little longer. I haven't talked to you in 3 years." Su Fengnian glared and said, "If you knew this would happen, why did you chase me out of the family?" Scram. The word scram was imposing. The pitiful and lamentable king of Biyao immediately fled. He didn't dare to stay any longer. For some reason, every time Jianghu faced De Zhugua, who Su Fengnian treated like an ordinary rich man who didn't teach his son well, she would feel a chill run down her spine. She didn't dare to show the slightest bit of killing intent towards this man who deserved even more hatred than Su Fengnian. At first, she thought it was because she was timid. However, the older she grew, the braver she became, the more she didn't dare to act rashly. It was as if this butcher, who had charged into the royal palace on horseback, was the most terrifying person in the world. She later learned that the previous emperor of this dynasty had personally promised to treat the royal family of West Chu well and even made her father king. However, Su Shao still stabbed the West Chu emperor to death in front of Jianghu, who was nestled in her father's arms. Her kind father, who preferred poetry over war, then threw a piece of white silk to her mother. Jianghu, the Taiping princess, whose real name was Jiang Si, had never understood the butcher Su Shao. She had told her mother, who had originally wanted to live, "If you don't want to become his plaything, then kill yourself." However, the cycle of karma was not pleasant. This cruel and merciless man had 2 useless sons. One was a fool, and the other was a dandy with no ambition. The fool was born with great strength. However, even so, he couldn't be the backbone of Biyang's 300,000 iron cavalry. Jianghu was going to kill Su Fengnian, who was going to inherit the title of king in the future. In this way, no matter how powerful Su Shao was, he would inevitably fall apart one day. Therefore, Jianghu was willing to wait and live. Su Fengnian waved his arm and dispersed the green and white luan in his hand. He threw away the small piece of Sichuan brocade that had a hole dug out by the sharp claws. He smiled at the martial god of Biyao, Yuan Zuozong, who had been standing respectfully at the side, and said, "Brother Yuan Zuozong, you should go and rest." Yuan Zuozong, who had never heard this intimate address, was stunned. He hesitated for a moment and then bowed and left. The tide listening pavilion was finally quiet. Looking out, one could see the picturesque scenery. Su Fengnian didn't pick up the fishing rod. Instead, he reclined on the couch and said softly, "Jiang and I, if you have the chance, you should go out and take a look." The captive princess, who didn't delve into the meaning of this, smiled disdainfully and said, "His Royal Highness' trip this time will cause a group of people to suffer an unexpected calamity. What a big deal. No wonder he is the young master of the Pillar State." Su Fengnian turned his head and said with a smile, "If not, would I be able to erase your chastity mark?" The corner of Jiang Ni's mouth curled up in disdain. It evoked a monstrous hatred. If it could be weighed on a scale, it would be 1,000 caddies of hatred. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Do you know that when you are angry, you look exactly the same as when you're happy? You have 2 little dimples. I like this part of you the most. So, when you kill me later, I will take a few more glances." Jiang and I said expressionlessly, "Just wait. The next time I kill you, I will smile the happiest." Su Fengnian sat up straight. He took out a handful of bait from a phoenix-carved glass basin and threw it into the lake outside the railing. Countless koi fish jumped out of the lake. Looking at this lively scene, His Royal Highness, who had his back to Jiang and I, said with emotion, "That will certainly be the most moving scenery in the world." Chapter 7. Crown Prince Su tossed out a few bundles of bait and got tired of watching the carp flip about. He clapped his hands and stood up. Originally, Jiang and I had prepared a damask soaked in warm water to wipe his hands, but Su Fengnian didn't take it. 3 years of tempering. It was difficult to go from extravagance to frugality, but there was also a transition from frugality to extravagance. He left the tide-listening pavilion alone and didn't forget to turn around and remind her. "Sister Jiang and I, don't even think about sneaking into the pavilion and trying to steal a secret martial arts manual. You know that none of the guard servants inside can be dealt with a divine talisman in your sleeve. Those old fellows are far less protective of the fairer sex than me. It's better for girls to grind their sleeves together with their bare hands. Let's go, don't glare at me. The first time I saw you, I knew Sister Jiang Ni's eyes were beautiful." After teasing the maidservants, Su Fengnian walked towards the stable that belonged to him and his second sister. Along the way, he saw beautiful maidservants and did not forget to reach out to hug their waists and touch their small hands. For those who were more beautiful, of course, he did not forget to rub their heavy breasts and call them sister. Then, he flirtatiously said, "Oh, there are a few extra tails of meat here. Don't tire yourself out walking." This caused a series of laughter that sounded like silver bells. Su Fengnian arrived at a stable that was even more extravagant than the average wealthy families. For the time being, there was only a lonely, maroon, lame horse inside. Old Huang, who had worked as a coachman for the prince's residence for many years, was chatting with the horse. He saw His Royal Highness, who had depended on him for 3 years, grinning foolishly out of habit, revealing 2 front teeth. Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and said in surprise, "Old Huang, where's your box? Why aren't you carrying it?" Old Huang was probably from Shu. He couldn't change his Western Shu accent, which wasn't very popular in the dynasty. The tiny Western Shu, which had less than 60,000 soldiers, couldn't escape the fate of being destroyed by the king of Biyao, just like the Western Shu dynasty. However, Old Huang was much cuter than Jiang and I. He knew his place very well. During these 3 years of bleak travel, if not for Old Huang's ability to fish, climb trees, steal chickens and dogs, and teach Su Fengnian how to weave straw sandals, he would have starved to death in a foreign land. The old servant was carrying a bag wrapped in rags on his back. There was only a long red sandalwood box in it. He would rather die than let Su Fengnian open it to see what was inside. At first, Su Fengnian thought that it was a famous Xuanji box used to store divine weapons in Jianghu. He thought that his father would at least send a peerless master to accompany him. But when he met the bandits for the first time and saw that this old servant was even more like a stray dog than he was completely disappointed. Every time he tried to persuade Old Huang to open the box, the old coachman would only shake his head and smile foolishly. Su Fengnian could only curse, "It's not like I want your wife to strip naked for me to see." Once in Qinghe County, Su Fengnian couldn't resist his curiosity and secretly studied it when old Huang went to take a dump. However, he didn't get the main point. He only felt that the box was cold and piercing just by holding it. As a result, old Huang's eyes were filled with hidden bitterness. He was even more pitiful than the virgin girls he took liberties with on the streets of Lingzhou. After that, perhaps it was retribution, Su Fengnian caught a cold the next day. It was old Huang who boiled medicine, boiled water, and stole sweet potatoes to roast. He was so busy that he was badly burned. After that, the old coachman carried Su Fengnian on his back for half a year. The biggest impression he had was that old Huang's bony skeleton made him panic. Of course, there was also some unspoken gratitude. After that, Su Fengnian didn't have any ideas about the box. However, it was inevitable that he would faintly think that he would find out the little secret in a certain year. Of course, it was an insignificant little secret. It would be a joke if an old coachman had such a big secret. To this day, Su Fengnian still remembered it clearly. After escaping the pursuit of the grassland bandits, he asked the old servant, "Old Huang, are you a master?" Old Huang nodded with a shyness that would only appear on a beautiful woman's face. Su Fengnian asked again, "The kind that's very tall?" Old Huang seemed to be even more embarrassed. He turned his head slightly and nodded again. Su Fengnian thought about the tragic scene of being chased by a group of people with wooden spears and hatchets. He resisted the urge to beat him up and asked again, "How tall?" Old Huang blinked and seemed to be thinking. After a while, he stretched out his hand and gestured. It seemed to be about the same height as His Royal Highness. Then, he lowered his height. Thus, Su Fengnian, who was hoping for a fluke, fell into complete despair. Therefore, Su Fengnian had every reason to be angry with the Pillar of Degua. Other than forgetting to arrange for a master to be his retainer, not only did he not tell Su Fengnian about the simple principle of not having a jade ring when traveling the Jianghu, he even encouraged Su Fengnian to say, "Son, when you go out, the most important thing is to protect your life. Here, put on this Wuxia armor that is invulnerable to swords, spears, water, and fire. Put on these gloves that are made from the silk of the ice silkworm. Here, there are 3 or 4 books that are similar to the Wudang sect's Shangqing Purple Yang tactics. Take them all. Good stuff. If you throw any of these books into the Jianghu, it will cause a bloody storm. Take some time to practice them. Who knows, you might become a master tomorrow. Take the banknotes. The jade pendants on your waist are worth a few hundred taels of gold. If you run out of money, find a pawn shop and sell them. Living a good life won't be a problem." In the beginning, Su Fengnian felt that it was indeed not bad. This kind of traveling was a smooth journey. He didn't have to worry about spending money like water. He could hook up with different beauties from different places, get to know famous heroes, and become brothers with famous heroes in the Jianghu. Just thinking about it made him happy. But later on, King found out that he was just a fat sheep waiting to be slaughtered. Whoever saw him would love him, whoever saw him would pounce on him. This bastard donkey's ass. In the end, the only use of those secret books was to tear them down and use them to wipe his feces. The only remaining half of the gold-swallowing treasure tome, which looked like a heavenly book, was finally put to use. On the way back, he met White Fox Face, who was more beautiful than any of the courtesans in Lingzhou. He knew the value of the book and agreed to accept the second half of the gold-swallowing treasure tome, and escort him back to Lingzhou. During that half a year, Su Fengnian finally met a true master who didn't have any evil intentions. He tried every possible way to please him, but to no avail. White Fox Face ignored him. Even when he walked, he would deliberately put a large distance between them. Unless he met an ignorant robber who blocked his way, he wouldn't talk nonsense. Su Fengnian walked into the stable and took a handful of horse grass for the lame horse. He sighed softly, "Red Rabbit, oh Red Rabbit. If second sister sees a good Fergana horse being tortured to this state, I can't guarantee that she won't give me chestnuts to eat." In these 3 years, 1 eagle, 1 horse, and an old servant who fortunately didn't have bad eyesight were all he had. Su Fengnian fed the horse for a while. When he thought of the news from the secret agent in the mansion that White Fox Face was still in the city, he prepared to leave the mansion to have some fun that he hadn't had in a long time. This fellow would occasionally mock him when he was down and out. If you're a young master from an aristocratic family, then I'm a woman. Su Fengnian had no reason not to show off. In the past, he only felt that it was right and proper to rely on his father's royal banner to intimidate others. Now, he still felt that way. He just cherished it a little more. After all, he had lived through more than 2 years of misery. Only now did he realize that the daily necessities of this world were not cheap. Old Huang and His Royal Highness had developed a tacit understanding. He seemed to know that he was going to indulge in wine and women, so he rubbed his hands and made a drinking gesture. Chapter 8. Su Fengnian laughed and said, "Don't worry, I won't forget to treat you to the best and most expensive Huadiao wine. Let's go." Su Fengnian had just walked out of the stable with the old groom when he saw the old Taoist priest who claimed to be an immortal. He didn't need to guess to know that the old swindler was here to ask him to persuade his younger brother to go to Mount Longhu to learn martial arts. 12 years ago, it was Su Fengnian who let his dog bite the old Taoist priest. Because his mother believed in Buddhism, His Royal Highness, who didn't believe in destiny, was still respectful to monks. However, when he saw a fortune teller on the street, he would definitely make a mess. The old Taoist priest of Mount Longhu was really unlucky. Back then, the old Taoist priest, who was slovenly and covered in lice, passed the first stage and almost lost his virginity. The beginning of that meeting was very unpleasant, but the end was still sloppy. Su Fengnian didn't forget to lecture the old Taoist priest of Mount Longhu in private before he left. "Old man, if you want to cheat people of their money, you should at least give up some money to get a decent set of clothes. Those Taoist priests in the supernatural novels all wear yellow crowns and Taoist robes. They can immediately ascend to the immortal stage with just one fart. Don't you want to learn? If you come to the palace like this again, I'll let my dog bite you again." It seemed that the old Taoist priest with the surname Zhao had learned his lesson. He really did change into a brand new Taoist robe and a yellow crown on his head. He even added a simple peachwood sword. Wherever he went, he would receive looks of respect that he had never received in the first half of his life. This made the old Taoist priest, who was usually expressionless on the mountain for decades, very happy. Su Fengnian put his arm around the old Taoist priest's shoulder and said softly, "Ox-nosed Taoist, it's a good thing that my younger brother is going to Mount Longhu. However, your Mount Longhu has formed a good relationship with my father. Don't you have anything to say? Otherwise, why would my younger brother go to Mount Wudang to learn martial arts? Why would he go to that godforsaken place? The scenery of Mount Wudang is very good. I can visit it every now and then." The old Taoist priest looked embarrassed. He looked around and saw that no one was around. Then, he quietly reached into his pocket and took out an old and yellowed book. He said reluctantly, "This is the Dragon Swordplay Manual." He didn't expect that he would turn on him. He didn't even look at the manual. He pointed to the Tide Listening Pavilion and said, "Dragon, you bastard. You. Do you think I need to go to another place to find a secret manual to practice or use martial arts? You. Don't you think it's embarrassing?" They were both old men who had lived for 60 to 70 years, but old Huang was very perceptive and perceptive. He curled his lips and laughed along with his highness. Only then did the old Taoist remember that there was a Tide Listening Pavilion in the prince's mansion that was known as the Arsenal. He suddenly understood and withdrew his hand awkwardly. "Then what should we do?" Su Fengnian lowered his voice and said, "Are there any young and pretty Taoist nuns in Mount Longhu? It's okay if they're a bit older, but they can't be over 35. If they're older, they'll be old. No matter how well they take care of themselves, they won't have the charm of a middle-aged woman." "Ah!" the old Taoist priest exclaimed in surprise. Su Fengnian raised his eyebrows and asked, "What? You don't have any? Or are you not willing?" The old Taoist priest seemed to be in a dilemma. But in a few blinks of an eye, he whispered, "There are some, but they're all my brother's disciples and grand disciples. I'd rather have no disciples than have substandard ones. That's why I have very few disciples. But since the Crown Prince wants to study Taoism, I don't mind recommending 1 or 2 female juniors. Su Fengnian patted the old Taoist priest's shoulder and gave him a thumbs up. You're right. The old Taoist priest began to recite the 3-5 imperial scriptures to atone for his sins. Grandmaster, please don't blame me. I'm doing this for the sake of Mount Longhu's 1,000-year plan. Then, the old Taoist priest, one of the 3 celestial masters of Mount Longhu, said anxiously, you have to pick an auspicious time to take in a disciple. If you don't hurry to Mount Longhu today, you'll miss it. It won't be appropriate for the young prince. Su Fengnian frowned. Right away. Celestial Master Zhao nodded with an anxious expression. Right away. Su Fengnian, who originally wanted to take his younger brother on a hunting trip, took a deep breath and ordered old Huang to wait on the street outside the mansion. He then took the ox-nosed Taoist priest, who didn't look like a celestial master at all, to find his beloved younger brother, Su Longxiang. 100 steps away from the stable, the old Taoist priest turned his head and looked at the old coachman who was smiling foolishly at the side of the stable. His heavy footsteps finally became lighter. When Su Fengnian arrived at his younger brother's courtyard, he found him squatting on the ground and looking at ants again. He walked over and patted his head. Stop looking. The ants on Mount Longhu are even bigger. Go there and look. Learn your skills and go down the mountain as soon as possible. Bring me a bag of wild hawthorns, do you hear me? The young prince was truly a fool. He stood up and nodded heavily. He smiled again, but of course, he was drooling again. The old Taoist priest was flabbergasted. How could such a difficult matter be settled so easily? The great pillar state, who had once turned the entire Jianghu upside down, had tried his best to persuade this disciple of his. Su Fengnian wiped his saliva and scolded jokingly. Stupid Huang man, look, did you see that? This person will be your master from now on. When you reach Mount Longhu, you can beat anyone you want, but just don't hit this old man. If anyone dares to bully you and call you an idiot, then beat them to death. If you can't beat them, then get your master to write a letter. This elder brother will lead our northern Liang cavalry and charge 2,000 li up Mount Longhu. Remember, don't get bullied. In this world, only us brothers and 2 sisters have the right to bully others. Su Longxiang seemed to have understood but not fully, and nodded. The old Taoist priest was scared out of his wits. With Su Fengnian taking action, Su Longxiang didn't resist at all. The prince's residence didn't drag things out either. With his foster son Qi Dangwa leading the way, 40 elite cavalry escorting them, and several capable people raised by the Biyao palace secretly keeping an eye on them. There was also a Taoist master from Mount Longhu. It was likely that no one would dare to mess with them. As they were about to leave, Crown Prince Su Fengnian stood in front of his younger brother and said softly, "Stupid Huang man, I won't be able to wipe your saliva in the future. But I promise you that I'll continue to help you find the most beautiful woman in the world to be your wife. If she doesn't want to, I'll tie her up and bring her into the bridal chamber." The young man who was blessed by the heavens to obtain the strength of the dragon elephant was stupid. His heart wasn't open, but it didn't mean that he didn't have any feelings. On the contrary, in some aspects, his feelings were especially strong. For example, he was the second person in the world besides his mother who would wipe his saliva for him. When he was 14 years old, Su Fengnian caused a great disaster. De Zhugua, who usually didn't hit or scold his children, almost took out an iron whip and smashed it on his most beloved son. No one dared to persuade him or stop him. It was only the stupid Huang man who stood in front of his brother and didn't yield an inch. Su Fengnian's eyes turned red. He turned to the old Taoist priest and said word by word, "Zhao Niobi, I've said it before. Don't let anyone bully Huang man. Although I, Su Fengnian, am an unscrupulous hedonist who doesn't have the strength to truss a chicken, you should know the consequences." The old Taoist priest smiled awkwardly and nodded with a bitter smile. The group gradually left. Su Fengnian and his father, Su Shao, didn't send them all the way out of the city. Su Fengnian found old Huang who was standing beside the jade lion. He smiled and said, "I'm not in the mood to drink today. How about later?" The old servant's smile was simple and bright. His old face was like a large patch of reeds that could only be seen in the wilderness. It couldn't be said to be charming or magnificent, but it had its own feelings. It was like a jar of old wine that had been sealed for many, many years. Chapter 9. A peerless beauty had come to the Dragon Gate Inn. This news was second only to His Royal Highness returning from his travels in Lingzhou City. The number of people who came to hunt for novelty almost broke the inn's door. Business was booming. Every time the beauty came out of the room to eat, the inn would be filled with wanderers who wanted to see the scenery. In the beginning, it was only the young hedonistic young masters who participated. Later on, even the old rich men who had been bedridden for years came to admire the beauty. They all exclaimed that the beauty was a feast for the eyes. The busybodies all said that this girl was even more moving than Lingzhou's #1 courtesan, Yu Yue, Lady Yu. Some of the old masters who had left Lingzhou and seen the world also said that they had never seen such a beautiful girl in their lives. There were even scholars who threw in large amounts of money and squeezed their heads to get a good seat in the inn. They took a sip of wine and had the thought of getting drunk even if the wine did not intoxicate them. They spread out the rice paper on the table and began to draw. The beauty who came from outside did not say anything. She treated everyone like they were nothing. She only drank the best aged Huadiao wine in Lingzhou. When she ate, she chewed slowly. However, she was not as shy and reserved as a pretty girl from a humble family. She had a different style. However, there were 2 blades of different lengths on the table, which made many lechers who had bad intentions back off. How could a girl from a decent family go out alone with blades, and 2 at that? The more beautiful a flower was, the harder it was to pluck it. This was the awareness that a rich man's son had to have. It was also the truth that he had pondered for many years in his hometown. Just like the 2 princesses in Biyao Palace, who dared to take a second look. Were they not afraid of having their eyeballs cut out? The head of the hedonistic young masters in Lingzhou, young Master Su, had long said, everyone coming out to be a hedonistic young master is not as easy as the commoners think. We have to pay attention to the rat holes and snake paths and rules. We have to be worthy of the head on our shoulders. The head is not used for shit, the butt is. Therefore, when the hedonistic young masters of Lingzhou went out to the neighboring provinces, they were especially proud. They looked down on the children of the local officials and always liked to boast about their family background, money, and brains. Since His Royal Highness had returned to the city, then when the beauty appeared, would His Royal Highness figure be far away? The answer was somewhat different from what they had expected. The hateful but respectable His Highness the Crown Prince had arrived 3 days later than what they had expected, but he had still arrived. When he appeared, everyone consciously left the inn. Nonsense, who didn't pay the price of blood when fighting with His Highness the Crown Prince over the top courtesan? Young Master Tang from the neighboring Dengzhou had a strong family background. Not only did he have a 3rd-rank official as his father, but he also had a 2nd-rank official as his grandfather. He overestimated himself and tried to steal a courtesan from His Royal Highness. Didn't he break an arm and return to Dengzhou? After that, it was said that his father, who was the Dengzhou magistrate, personally came to apologize. In the end, he was not even allowed to enter the palace. His Royal Highness had only one word, scram. The inn was suddenly empty. There were no sparrows outside, but the innkeeper still had a flattering smile on his face. He offered the best flower carving that he had kept for many years with both hands, saying that he was bold enough to give His Royal Highness a welcome dinner. His father, His Royal Highness, who used to never give half a penny for drinking, suddenly turned around and tipped him with a 5,000 silver banknote. The innkeeper quickly hid behind the counter, his hands trembling as he held the banknote. He was not worried that His Royal Highness was just pretending to be forthright in front of the beauties, because no one had ever heard of the Crown Prince asking for a single cent back after leaving his pocket. He was definitely the Wang family's style of not taking back what was given. Generally speaking, it was not false that Lingzhou City was afraid of His Royal Highness, but he had been lawless for so many years, so no one wanted to commit suicide. For example, those young ladies who were lucky enough to be invited into Biyao Palace all said afterwards that they were only going to admire the scenery with His Royal Highness, leaving behind undergarments and other personal items. At most, they would just rub it a little, but they were not forced to do that kind of thing. At first, no one believed it, but after a few beautiful virgins left the palace and had their bodies checked, they found out that what they said was true. This made some of the dissolute women secretly angry that His Royal Highness did not kidnap them into the palace. Was it because they were not beautiful enough? Su Fengnian sat opposite Biyao and personally opened the flower carving. The fragrance of the wine instantly filled the air. He took a bowl of wine and did not take it. Su Fengnian put down the bowl and laughed. Don't worry, I have done the shady business of using knockout drugs, but I know that you are a master of profound internal strength, so I won't embarrass myself. Usually, I would try it, but today I only brought Old Huang. I was afraid that you would hit my head with embroidered winter and spring thunder. What's more, I'm not gay. What's there to be afraid of? Are you afraid that I'll take your 2 sabers? You're underestimating me, aren't you? Biyao smiled and finally picked up the bowl and took a sip. These few ordinary subtle movements almost made Su Fengnian, who had seen countless beauties, dazzled. He wanted to beat his chest and stomp his feet to ask God why such a beauty was a man. Biyao's voice was soft and sweet. Someone who can give away the gold-swallowing treasure book of the dark sect so casually doesn't look like someone who would covet embroidered winter and spring thunder. Su Fengnian added, it's not, doesn't look like, it isn't. In the 5 months since they met by chance and barely knew each other, Biyao had always been a woman of few words. She was only slightly better than mute, but she was not as willing to talk as she was today. He remembered that the first sentence she said was a bolt from the blue. I'm a man. Su Fengnian did not believe her at first, but after getting along with her for a long time, His Royal Highness, who was experienced in women, had no choice but to believe her. Although Biyao did not talk much, she was used to doing what she said. For example, when she killed the bandits, she said that she would kill all of them without leaving a half-dead one. She said that she would escort Su Fengnian to Lingzhou City after getting the secret manual. Even if she could go back on her words and leave, she still followed him to Lingzhou. Chapter 10. Then there was the feeling that White Fox's face gave people. He was indeed not a woman. He drank wine like he was drinking water and killed people like he was picking up grass. Su Fengnian trusted his intuition. He was the first to not be able to stand White Fox's condescending gaze. He solemnly vowed, I am a young master, a big silk pants, not a beggar in your eyes. White Fox's face lightly replied with a hair-raising sentence, I don't lie, but I also don't like people lying to me. If you lie to me, after I enter Lingzhou, I will kill you and place the gold-swallowing treasure tome on your corpse. Along the way, Su Fengnian thought that White Fox's face was an out-and-out lunatic. He was a lunatic that was so beautiful that there was no limit to it. He was a lunatic that was so beautiful that there was no limit to it. He was a lunatic that was so beautiful that there was no limit to it. The key point was that he was also a man. Su Fengnian's heart was broken. He had already agreed that he would marry the world's most beautiful woman for Huang Man. If it was a woman, how simple would it be? Once they were in his territory, even the world's top 10 experts would have to obediently stay. Now, he only hoped that before his younger brother went down the mountain, he would meet the news that was circulating in Jianghu. He only hoped that the 4 sisters who were known as the world's 4 most beautiful women would not disappoint their titles. He would give his younger brother one, keep 2 for himself, and let the entire Jianghu fight for the last one. White Fox's face held a bowl in one hand and stroked a winter-embroidered saber in the other. The saber was publicly recognized as the head of the 9 short weapons among the 18 types of weapons. Those who practiced the sword were smarter and were too lazy to fight for the head of the 9 short weapons. They directly gave themselves the title of the Emperor of Weapons. The winter-embroidered saber was 3 feet and 2 inches long and the handle was 2.5 inches long. It was exquisite beyond compare. Compared to the simple and clumsy spring thunder, it was more beautiful. It was very in line with His Royal Highness's aesthetic. When he was traveling in Lingzhou, he liked to go to the armory and pick a pleasing-looking sword to hang on his waist. As for the winter embroidery saber, He estimated its weight to be about 2 catties. However, White Fox's face once revealed that the saber weighed about 10 catties and 9 tails when she was in a good mood. Su Fengnian did not have any strong points. He was born in Biyao Palace and spent his childhood climbing up and down in the tide-listening pavilion of the martial library every day. He had seen the world, so he believed it immediately. As for the short and narrow spring thunder saber, it had never been unsheathed, and the face of the white fox had never been mentioned. For Su Fengnian, it was a pity that it was neither big nor small. Su Fengnian raised his glass and said, "A toast to you." White Fox's face tilted its head slightly, but Su Fengnian knew that this meant that White Fox's face was inquiring. Hence, he replied with a smile. "I'm not thanking you for sending me back to Lingzhou. This is not a favor. I'll give you half of the gold-swallowing treasure tome and we're even. However, you've made me certain that there are masters in this world who can single-handedly overturn hundreds of bandits. Otherwise, my 3 years of suffering would have been in vain." White Fox's face continued to maintain that angle. Su Fengnian, who had a photographic memory, was not stupid. He took the initiative to explain again, "Whether you believe it or not, I have to tell you that there are masters like you in the prince's mansion, and there are bound to be more than 1 or 2. However, no one has ever shown their skills in front of me. It's probably because of Su Zhao's warning. This has led me to suspect that flying over eaves, vaulting over walls, and stepping on snow without leaving a trace is just a boast from Jianghu people." White Fox's face lowered her head and drank a mouthful of wine. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Say it. When I come to find you, what do you want me to do?" White Fox's face, who was teasingly called the most beautiful woman in the world by him, revealed a smile for the first time. Very in line with his style, she went straight to the point and said, "I want to enter the tide-listening pavilion and read half of the martial arts manuals in the world." Su Fengnian was startled and said, "What do you want to do? Isn't it boring to learn martial arts? Back then, I refused to learn martial arts no matter what. I practiced in winter and summer. Perhaps I wouldn't be able to take a break for the rest of my life. How can it be more comfortable than being an idle playboy?" White Fox's lips curled up slightly, but she did not say a word. Apparently, people who walked different paths could not make plans together. Su Fengnian frowned and said, "Just to become the most powerful master in the world?" White Fox's face looked at the spring thunder saber lying on the table and shook her head slightly. Su Fengnian asked, "Could it be that you want to become more powerful because you can't compete with others for a woman for the time being?" White Fox's face glanced at Su Fengnian with a strange look, as if she was looking at an idiot. Su Fengnian was at his wit's end. He decided to shut up and drink to drown his sorrows. He did not forget to ask the tavern keeper to warm 2 pots of the best and most expensive yellow wine for Old Huang. Old Huang's surname was Huang, and he only liked yellow wine. He was a strange person with a strange temper, just like White Fox's face. However, why was Old Huang not a master like White Fox's face? At the thought of this, Su Fengnian gulped down more wine. White Fox's face opened her mouth slowly and said, "I want to kill 4 people." Su Fengnian was stunned. "Is it difficult even with your superb skills?" White Fox's face looked strange again. Su Fengnian immediately knew that he was being an idiot again. He said self-deprecatingly, "All right, then they are the top 10 masters in the world." White Fox's face looked out of the window with a lonely expression, just like the autumn scenery. Not far from it. 2 of them are first pin masters, the top 10 masters in the world. The other 2 are probably more powerful, but half of them are not from the Liang dynasty. Su Fengnian slapped his thigh and said, "White Fox's face, you are awesome. I like heroes like you." Su Fengnian felt that he had accidentally revealed the secret of heaven. However, the beauty who heard the nickname, White Fox's face, only smiled slightly, as if she did not hate it. Instead, she found it interesting. Su Fengnian asked tentatively. "The tide-listening pavilion is not a place you can enter whenever you want. For as long as I can remember, almost every year there are so-called heroes of Jianghu who are like moths to a flame and then thrown into the wilderness. I have seen it several times with my own eyes, and they died miserably. However, I can promise you that once you enter the prince's mansion, I will take out the second book for you until you finish reading it. If, and I'm saying if, Su Xiao agrees, you can stay in the Tide Listening Pavilion. The prerequisite is that you don't hate those zombie-like guards. Heh, they aren't as handsome and humorous as me. Bai Huer had a long and narrow face, and her peach blossom eyes were shining with extraordinary splendor. She looked straight at Su Fengnian and said, Su Huanghua, name your conditions. Su Fengnian said nervously, I only have one condition. Tell me your name. Bai Huer tilted her head and pondered for a moment before replying softly, Nangong Push. Note, Nangong Push, Yi, read the fourth sound. Chapter 11. White Fox entered the palace without any resistance. For those Jianghu people whose homes and sects were destroyed by the Biyao cavalry, it was not only difficult to enter the palace, but also dangerous inside. Together with the martial emperor's city, which was guarded by the second in the world, and the sword tomb of the Wu family, which was full of sword immortals, it was known as one of the three most dangerous places. The martial emperor's city had an old monster who looked down on all the masters in the world. The sword tomb had a large number of withered swordsmen who were only allowed to use swords or even touch swords. In the Biyao palace, in addition to the Biyao cavalry guards on the surface, there were countless masters hiding in the dark. During that martial arts catastrophe, not only did the butcher Su Xiao kill many famous Jianghu masters like cutting rice straws, but he also attracted a large number of lackeys, who were not of good character but had abnormal strength. Since the first day Su Xiao went to the battlefield, he almost never took off his armor or left his saddle. For nearly 40 years, it seemed that he had no end to his meteoric rise. It was enough for Su Xiao, the great devil who was feared by all the Jianghu people, to keep countless henchmen, lobbyists, chivalrous men and assassins, and to bestow them with great wealth and beautiful maids, fame and power. After the martial arts library was built, there were many martial arts fanatics who went there to learn and were willing to sell their lives for the king of Biyao. Who would dare to pull out Su Xiao's reverse scale? There was only one person who dared to call himself Daddy in front of Su Xiao, and it was only Su Fengnian who led White Fox into the palace. At this moment, His Highness the Crown Prince briefly introduced the scenery of the prince's mansion to White Fox, who only knew his name. As Su Fengnian said, he could not learn martial arts through hard work. He had the martial arts library that all the martial artists in the world dreamed of, but he only knew how to read some unorthodox books. Therefore, Su Fengnian did not have much mysterious feeling about the murderous intent every 3 steps in the dark of the prince's mansion. White Fox did not dare to take it lightly. When they arrived at the towering Tide Listening Pavilion, they looked up at the top of the pavilion with a complicated expression. Although it was called a pavilion, it was actually a proper attic with a pointed roof and layers of cornices that looked like one. Su Fengnian chuckled and said, it is claimed to have 6 floors, but there are actually 9 floors inside. The number starts from 1 to 9, but there are people in the capital who have nothing better to do, so it is like this. As you can see, there are corridors on the 5th and 6th floor. There are no books or items on the top floor, it is empty. There are 5 people in the pavilion who are in charge of arranging the martial arts manuals according to the difficulty of practice from the bottom to the top. They should be the so-called guards in Jianghu. They are all old fellows I have known since I was young, and they come and go like ghosts. There is only one copyist, and I learned calligraphy, painting from him. He is a sickly person, more like a ghost than a ghost, but he is still addicted to wine. Every time I go upstairs, I have to bring him wine. If the guards say that they are masters, I will believe them, but if my half-master is, I will jump down from the 9th floor. White Fox did not ask to enter the pavilion. He did not even admire the thousands of carps in the lake. He turned around and walked away, saying lightly, help me get a set of summer mustard seed. The sacred steel forest temple of Buddhism only has half a set, but there should be another half in the pavilion. There are 6 books in total. I flip through the books quickly, so it is too troublesome for me to read one book at a time. It is also not worth it to me, because I will pay for the wine you need. I can only give you one of the embroidered winter and spring thunder, so I will feel more at ease if you don't go upstairs a few times. Can I have the spring thunder? Su Fengnian asked softly, as if he was trying to bargain. White Fox was indeed a straightforward man. He said without hesitation, yes. Su Fengnian was surprised. Are you really willing to give it to me? White Fox, who was leaving, said calmly, there is nothing in this world that I can't bear to let go. Su Fengnian, who was following behind him, twitched his mouth and muttered disapprovingly, I am afraid that only those who are all alone are qualified to say this. White Fox's face lived in a secluded courtyard not far from the Crown Prince's courtyard. She lived a life of yellow and green lanterns that was extremely boring in Su Fengnian's eyes. She stayed up all night. Judging from her posture, she was only short of chiseling the wall to steal everything. Su Fengnian originally wanted to take this beauty to enjoy the scenery, but he gave up the idea. Other than delivering books to the courtyard, he went to the Tide Listening Pavilion to return the books. He only chatted a little when he delivered the books, asking about Jianghu matters. For example, he asked White Fox who was the top 10 masters in the world, and whether the 4 beauties were really the most beautiful. These were all naive questions for laymen. White Fox, who was living under someone else's roof, did not want to depend on others. He mostly ignored them. There was nothing Su Fengnian could do about it, but the only thing he gained was that the unreasonable White Fox face was now willing to let him touch the embroidered winter and spring thunder sabers. She did not even mind him taking out the embroidered winter and performing a few lame moves for himself. Regarding this, de Zhuguo turned a blind eye and did not ask a single question. As soon as the news of His Royal Highness returning to the city spread, many rich playboys from Lingzhou who were close to Su Fengnian rushed to his door. At that time, he was still sleeping and de Zhuguo chased them all away. Chapter 12. Until now, there were people who could enter the manor to disturb him. One was Yan Qiji, the second son of Yan Jieshi, and the other was the notorious young master Li of Fengzhou, Li Hanlin. Due to the unfortunate homophony of his name, the former was called Grandpa Eating Chicken by the nearby provinces and counties. However, he was a rare gentleman. He was a bookworm, but his scholarly style was rather cute. He was vague on small matters, but he was clear on important matters. Young Master Li, who had an elegant name, was a complete bully. Throwing living people into cages to watch the tragedy of their bodies being dismembered was just one of the perverted interests of this number 1 dandy in Feng province. He also liked both men and women. He especially liked young husbands with red lips and white teeth. He always had 1 or 2 handsome young boys in green clothes by his side to play with. He knew Yan Jieshi because young Master Yan was used to being His Royal Highness's follower since he was young. Su Fengnian also liked to tease this peer who always talked about the teachings of saints. As for Li Hanlin, this scum, he was cruel and merciless when it came to others, but he treated his friends well. Moreover, Li Hanlin had a sister who was extremely beautiful. Su Fengnian had been drooling for a long time, so he didn't want to be close to her. Other than the bookworm Yan Qiji and young Master Li Hanlin, there was also a good official's son whose surname was Kong. He followed his father to become an official in the capital and hadn't seen him for 4 years. He was a martial arts fanatic. When the 4 of them got together, the division of labor was basically Su Fengnian coming up with bad ideas. Yan Qiji, who was meticulous, was responsible for cleaning up the mess, and Kong was responsible for martial arts fanatic. If the matter was exposed, then Li Hanlin would be the scapegoat. It was a perfect plan. Brother Feng, Yan Qiji, who had been Su Fengnian's follower for more than 10 years, was already an elegant young master. However, when they met, he looked like he was about to cry. After he called out to Feng Zhou affectionately, his eyes became wet. Sigh, this guy was good at everything, but he was spoiled, sentimental, and sad like a girl. No wonder Li Hanlin felt that this guy was as good as him. However, he was a man and played with little husbands, while Yan Qiji was in love with Brother Feng. Brother Feng. Li Hanlin's greeting was much more domineering. He wanted to hug Su Fengnian, who had not seen him for a long time. However, Su Fengnian lifted his leg and gently pushed it against his abdomen. Li Hanlin laughed and said, "Stay away from me. You smell like a man." The gang of scoundrel friends reunited at the top of Mount Qingliang, the White Crane Tower, which was most suitable for gazing into the distance. Hanging outside this building was a couplet: an old friend sent me down to Yangguan, an immortal helped me up to Mount Huangshan. It didn't come from one of those famous calligraphers in the imperial court whose words were worth 1,000 pieces of gold. Instead, it came from the 8-year-old Su Fengnian. Now, it looked even more childish. However, even though His Royal Highness had improved, the copyist in the Tide Listening Pavilion, who was also His Royal Highness's half-master, said that this was the most unskilled couplet that His Royal Highness had ever written. Both the words and the meaning were the same. Back then, when the Great Pillar State was happy, he copied it and hung it up after meticulously copying it. All these years, there had been no sign of him changing it. Su Fengnian did not talk much about the bitterness and hardships of the past 3 years. He only picked out some fresh anecdotes of the Wulin world and told them to his 2 contemporaries. Listening to him, the 2 of them were shocked and envious. After drinking a pot of wine, Su Fengnian was almost done talking. Yan Qiji and Li Hanlin were still thinking about it. Su Fengnian walked to the corridor and leaned against the railing. He smiled gently and said, "Now you know that you're frogs at the bottom of a well. After I eat chicken, I'll definitely be able to read 10,000 books. I've also walked several thousand li. What about you, Hanlin?" The carefree Li Hanlin scratched his head and said, "Why don't you become a general in the future and kill 10,000 people?" Yan Qiji said disdainfully, "Brute." Li Hanlin stomped his feet and said, "Do you dare to say this to the Great Pillar State?" Yan Qiji was speechless and couldn't refute it. Su Fengnian suggested, "How about we go out for a ride?" Li Hanlin was the first to agree. He said excitedly, "Then you must go to the Purple Gold House. Yu Huakue has not received a single customer for the past 3 years because of you. Her reputation has been overshadowed by a new Huakue." Su Fengnian asked, "Did you bring any money?" Li Hanlin patted his bulging belly and said, "Did you see? This time, I stole 10,000 taels of silver from the secret room. For Brother Feng, I've sacrificed everything. When I go back, I'll accept being grounded." Yan Qiji said mockingly, "Look at you." Li Hanlin was thick-skinned. He laughed and said, "Then you should steal some. Not 10,000 taels, just 1,000 taels. Do you dare? You scholars only know how to talk on paper. When it comes to serious things like scolding and fighting, which time didn't Brother Feng and us do the work? Even if you strip a woman naked, you wouldn't dare to roll on her belly. How dare you say I'm useless?" Yan Qiji's face turned red and he snorted. Every bleak night with the sky as his quilt and the ground as his bed, listening to old Huang's ear-piercing snoring not far away, Su Fengnian, who had changed from complaining to seeking joy in the midst of bitterness, would miss the time when they quarreled with each other. He also remembered the time when they rode on horses by the Nanhuai River, teased innocent people together, sang loudly in the brothel together, caused trouble together, committed sins together, and got drunk together. The 3 of them said in unison, "Cheers." Chapter 13. The Zijin house was famous, very famous, extremely famous. It was said that when His Majesty came to the northern Liang Prince's mansion to avoid the summer heat, he had visited the Zijin house incognito, just to see the beauty of Li Yuanyuan, who deserved to be called the top courtesan of the 4 prefectures that year. Of course, this was just hearsay without any evidence. After Li Yuanyuan disappeared, there was no longer an undisputed courtesan in the 4 prefectures. It was just like 100 flowers blooming. The beauties of the various brothels racked their brains to compete with each other for beauty. This continued until the appearance of Yu Yue, whose family had fallen from grace. Women who humiliated themselves would probably not use their real names, so Yu Yue's original name was unknown. Her real surname was probably Yu, so she used a homophone. The biggest benefactor of the Zijin house, His Royal Highness, had privately asked this most taboo question in the brothel. Yu Yue smiled and did not say anything, but she did not disappoint Su Fengnian too much. She performed a dazzling sword dance that had never been seen before, causing Su Fengnian to be dumbfounded. First, he was stunned, then he was terrified. If it was not for the deaf and mute old monster that was raised by Biyao Palace standing outside, Su Fengnian, who was not only afraid of death, but also of pain, would have fled long ago. After this, the number of times he went to the Zijin house became less and less, and the doubts in his heart became stronger and stronger. 3 young masters rode on 3 fine horses, galloping wildly on the main road of Lingzhou city, with a large group of guards following behind them. Li Hanlin laughed wildly, feeling unsatisfied. Without Brother Feng these 3 years, his days could not be considered happy. Yan Qiji, who had been dragged into the water countless times, had long accepted his fate. He tried his best to avoid pedestrians. Su Fengnian, the heavenly young master of the 4 prefectures, took the lead. He took off his Zijin crown and simply used a jade hairpin to tie up his hair. He gave up on the cumbersome sword, folding fan, jade bracelet, and so on, appearing even more elegant and handsome. He headed straight for the gentle land of gold and silver. The brothel keeper of the Purple Gold House was also a famous courtesan back in the day. Following the rise of the Purple Gold House, she was too lazy to show her face in public unless there were important guests. Today, however, she hurriedly dressed up and personally went out to welcome the 3 young masters who could do whatever they wanted. The 3 of them dismounted from their horses and handed the reins over to the big tortoise who had been waiting for a long time. Without needing Su Fengnian to say anything, the familiar Li Hanlin took out a banknote worth 500 taels and stuffed it into the neckline of the middle-aged brothel keeper, who was more charming than an entertainer. He laughed strangely and said, "Auntie Han, this young master has never tasted a woman of your age. Why don't you make an exception today? Big Mother Han, do you have the skills to take 10,000 taels of silver from here? This young master has heard that back in the day, you were the best at playing the flute." The brothel keeper stretched out a finger and gently poked Li Hanlin, who had a devilish look on his face. She smiled charmingly and said, "Oh, young Master Li is so elegant this time. As long as you don't mind an old cow eating young grass, Auntie Han will use all kinds of martial arts. Not to mention playing the flute, even the guanyin sitting upside down on the lotus is very skilled." Although she was teasing Li Hanlin, the brothel keeper's eyes were always on Su Fengnian. Li Hanlin hugged Auntie Han's slender and flexible waist and entered the Purple Gold House with Brother Feng and Yan Shuchai. He laughed softly and said, "Auntie Han, you know my taste. This time I snuck out and didn't have time to bring my errand boy. Do you have a little husband who can train me well? As for you, I suggest you seduce young Master Yan. He is still a virgin. As long as you can torment him until his back hurts and his legs cramp, I will not only give you all the money I have, but also give you 5,000 taels of silver on credit. How about this business? Of course, don't forget to give young Master Yan a small red packet of 66 taels of silver after this." The brothel keeper, who was not young but was not yet old, said charmingly, "If I don't do that, the prefecture overseer will seal up my Purple Gold House. As for little husbands, there are a few who are about to debut. They are even more tender than girls. Their skin is guaranteed to be like Sichuan brocade and satin. I guarantee you will be 100% satisfied." Li Hanlin chuckled and said, "Then let's follow the old rules. His Royal Highness will go to Yu Huakui's place. I will find some fun myself. Auntie Han will find 2 artists who know how to dance for young Master Yan." She pretended to be resentful and said, "Young Master Li, don't you want to have a taste of Auntie Han's tongue?" Li Hanlin slapped her plump buttocks and said, next time, save your energy and then fight Auntie Han for 800 rounds. I must properly experience your 18 kinds of martial arts." Su Fengnian was not surprised by this. He went straight to the backyard and found a courtyard with a single door planted with banana trees. He pushed open the door and entered. Unlike the brothel keeper, Auntie Han, a woman sat in the courtyard and stared blankly at a damaged banana tree. She was only wearing green clothes, and today was no exception. She obviously heard Su Fengnian's chuckle, but she still did not move. She was different from those courtesans who emphasized extravagance. She did not have a personal servant girl to serve her. She even cleaned the room and the courtyard herself. She was a maverick. Among all the prostitutes, she really stood out like a crane among a flock of chickens. On the stone table sat a white cat that was neither fat nor thin. Just like its owner's enchanting figure, it was not appropriate to add or subtract even a bit. The white cat overflowed with spirituality and had a pair of eyes that were as resplendent as rubies. When it stared at people, it made people feel that it was absurd and strange. The most clever thing was that this pet with snow-white fur was called Wu Mainyang. Su Fengnian sat beside her and said softly, "I just returned to Lingzhou and slept my fill. I immediately came out to see you." Yu Huakue stretched out her slender hand and stroked Wu Mainyang's head. The little girl said softly in a fit of pique, "Yu Wei is just a prostitute. How could she dare to have extravagant hopes? The first time, I only mustered up my courage and joked about asking His Royal Highness for the status of a concubine. That person made a series of bad moves during the conversation, and I slaughtered a large dragon. The second time, it was just a sword dance, and that person didn't dare to stay in this courtyard any longer. I just don't know what kind of trouble will come up this time. That person won't come again." It was the hardest thing to enjoy a beauty's grace. Su Fengnian said angrily in an indignant tone, "That guy is really a good-for-nothing. He's as timid as a mouse and as petty as a bug. Miss, you don't have to get angry over this kind of person. The next time you see him, just give him a good beating." The corners of Yu Youwei's mouth curled up slightly, but she deliberately put on a straight face and said, "Oh? Then may I ask where young master is from? What's your surname and name?" Su Fengnian said shamelessly, "Unfortunately, my surname is Su and my name is Fengnian. I have the same name as that bastard, but I'm thousands of miles better than him. Even if Miss said you wanted to be a concubine, he would immediately carry you home in a palanquin with 8 carriers carrying gongs and drums." Yu Yue finally turned her head to look at Su Fengnian. However, this beauty with limpid eyes didn't have much joy in them. She continued to look at Ba Jiao. "It's too late. I'm going to Chuzhou tomorrow. That's my hometown. I won't be coming back." Su Fengnian cried out in alarm. Yu Yue retracted her gaze and stared at Wu Mainyang, who was relying on her for survival. She said bitterly, "You regret it, don't you? But there's no medicine for regret in this world." Su Fengnian remained silent and frowned. Yu Yue lay on the stone table and murmured, "His Royal Highness." "Look, Wu Mainyang is looking at the wall." Chapter 14. Su Fengnian followed the white cat's line of sight and turned his head to look at the low wall. There wasn't much scenery. He rubbed his cheeks and said, "When people outside the wall hear the beauty on the swing laugh, they feel helpless. But I've already walked into the wall. Why did you sneak out? Wouldn't that make people feel even more helpless?" Yu Yue smiled and made a playful face. "You deserve it." Su Fengnian was stunned. He had known her for a long time, but he had never seen her so lively. In the past, she was always as quiet as water, unperturbed. Su Fengnian mistakenly thought that she would remain calm even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of her eyes. He also never thought that she would really become a beautiful concubine of a rich family. She was the most moving duckweed. If she became a plump banana in the courtyard, perhaps she wouldn't be so lively anymore. In his heart, Su Fengnian cursed himself for being an art-farer who had learned all the bad things from his ruffian father. This old man had purposely placed a book he had written, Half a Lifetime on the Horse, in the Tide Listening Pavilion. He had placed it next to the famous works of the art of war. What a shameless fuss. She held Wu Mainyang with both hands and asked with her head bowed, "Fengnian, I'll dance with you for the last time. Do you dare to watch?" Su Fengnian suddenly felt a sense of lofty aspiration. "Why wouldn't I dare?" Yu Yue said softly, "There's no medicine for regret in this world." Su Fengnian smiled. "It's worth it even if I die." After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Yu Yue walked out. She was magnificent and beautiful. She danced with the sword in an extremely unconventional way. The red silk wrapped around her hand and the end of the sword was tied to the end. In an instant, the courtyard was filled with sword light. Last time, a zither girl was invited to perform the song, Riding Out of Liangzhou. This time, she personally sang the song, looking at the city wall. This poem was spread from the Shangyin Academy after the fall of West Chu. It didn't rhyme, but each word was sorrowful and indignant. It was ranked first among the mournful poems in the world. West Chu had a female gongsun. Her sword dance shook the world. The spectators were as dejected as the mountains, and the heavens and the earth bowed their heads for a long time. Among the 3,000 maids of the former emperor, Gongsun Jinchi ranked first. The flag of Great Phoenix City was lowered, and only the beautiful woman stood on top of the city wall. 180,000 people had taken off their armor, and there wasn't a single man left in the country. Just now, Wu Meinyang was looking at the wall. Then who was it that was looking at the beauty standing on top of the fallen city walls? The song ended. The long sword flew out with a murderous aura, aiming straight for Su Fengnian's head. She seemed to have heard the dying man's last words, 10 fingers peeling green onions. How good would it be if you could just talk with my hands without mentioning the sword? In that instant, Yu You's delicate hands trembled, but her sword had already pierced out. There was no medicine for regret in this world. The poem, Gazing at the City Wall, was written by Yu You's father for her mother. At that time, the father and daughter were wrapped in the tide of refugees. When they looked back at the city wall, there was only a delicate figure. Not long after her father returned to Shangyin Academy, he died of depression. Her real name was Yu Xuanji, so she traveled a long distance to Lingzhou. First, she learned the most authentic Fengzhou accent, then became the most unbearable prostitute in the 3 religions and 9 schools. Fortunately, she was beautiful and was trained to be a courtesan from the beginning. She did not have to do the disgusting sex business. Then, naturally, she met His Highness the Crown Prince, who liked to flirt with women. They spent most of their time playing chess. This butcher's son was really unlike his father. He didn't know any martial arts. He was lustful, but he wasn't lustful. He didn't even mind telling her that many of his poems were bought with money from scholars to keep up appearances. Yu Xuanji only learned the basics of Gongsuan's sword dance, but she was confident that it was enough to kill Su Fengnian. The premise was that there were no lackeys of Biyao Palace standing outside the room. She did not get the chance to kill him for 5 years. Then, Su Fengnian disappeared for 3 years. In another half a year, it would be his mother's death anniversary. Yu Xuanji was prepared to leave everything behind and guard the tomb for the rest of his life. But he came back, and there were no bodyguards guarding the entrance of the courtyard. Was this the will of heaven? She asked him if he dared to watch the sword dance. He said that death was worth it. Assassinating His Royal Highness, the most beloved son of the pillar state Su Shao, she must die. No one in the world could survive after doing such a thing. Well, there was a companion on the road to the netherworld. When the time came, he could beat and scold her as he wished. Yu Xuanji could not bear to watch anymore. There was a clang. The sword that was an inch away from Su Fengnian's forehead broke into 2. Yu Xuanji opened her eyes in a daze. She did not know when, but there was a woman in a white robe in the courtyard. Even she had to praise her beauty. Failed the assassination? Yu Xuanji did not know if she was sad or lucky. She still had a sword in her hand, which was originally meant to kill herself to escape the humiliation. She raised her hand and was ready to slit her throat and die a clean death. Unfortunately, Wu Meinyang was going to become a stray cat. That man also said that when the snow covered the ground, standing in the tide-listening pavilion of the prince's mansion, one could see the most beautiful scenery. How beautiful was the most beautiful? Without Su Fengnian saying anything, Yu Xuanji, who was determined to be a dead man, was grabbed by the peach blossom-like woman with one hand and snatched the sword away. With a casual toss, she cut off a large piece of banana leaves. That was not enough. She hit Yu Huakui's abdomen with her knee, making this pitiful beauty bow like a shrimp. Su Fengnian wanted to mutter, "Why does a beauty have to make things difficult for another beauty?" But after witnessing the ruthlessness of the white fox's face, he tactfully kept his mouth shut. Then, he saw the dazed Yu Yue. Although Su Fengnian was certain that he would not die here, he could not help but want to curse her, bitch, and then rush up to her and give her 17 or 18 slaps. But he thought to himself, a little impatience will spoil the great plan of sharing the same bed. He exhaled a mouthful of foul air. Outside the 4 provinces of the cold land, it was easier for Su Fengnian to die than to live. But in the cold land, it was much more difficult to die than to live. You bunch of assassins are like carps crossing the river. Do you really think that my father, who is the pillar of the country and the king of Biyao, is an embroidered pillow? Moreover, Su Fengnian had experienced the hardships of being at the bottom of society for the past 3 years. His mind had matured a lot. Back then, he was only puzzled by Yu Huakuei's inexplicable sword dance. He was now hanging out with his father, Yuan Zuozong, and a group of first-class martial artists who had walked on the battlefield every day. His Royal Highness did not know martial arts, but even if he had never eaten pork, he had seen pigs run. When he returned to Lingzhou, he had made up his mind to take the risk and confirm what medicine Yu Yue had in her gourd. If it was an aphrodisiac, that would be the best. He could take it home and enjoy it. If it was a poison, he could survive it. But as for the result, what else could a man who had suppressed his anger for 3 years do to a beautiful woman who he wanted to pounce on in her sleep? The only unexpected thing was that the one who made the move was White Fox's face. She was not the most powerful and domineering master in the residence that he had told his father in advance. Of course, looking at the situation, even if White Fox's face was not that high, it was quite high. Su Fengnian said shamelessly, "White Fox's face, do you have any techniques to make her lose her resistance? Like sealing her acupoints or something like that?" White Fox's face nodded and said, "There is something even simpler." She directly chopped Yu Huakuei's fair neck with her hand and knocked her unconscious. Su Fengnian's face stiffened. He ran over to check her breathing. After confirming that she was not dead, he sneered proudly. When he raised his head to look, White Fox's face had already disappeared. She indeed had the demeanor of a master. Su Fengnian carried the delicate body on his shoulder and carried it out of Zijin Tower. On this day, the news of His Royal Highness forced himself on Yu Huakuei began to spread like wildfire in Lingzhou City. Chapter 15. The rich playboys in Lingzhou City were in awe of His Highness' domineering attitude. After 3 years of seclusion, he had just returned to Lingzhou for a few days and he had already desecrated Yu Huakuei. Su Fengnian carried the lame assassin, whose real name was Yu Xuanji, back to the prince's mansion, followed by Li Hanlin, whose clothes were disheveled. Yan Qiji did not like to visit prostitutes. Just now, he was sitting upright and still, chatting with the elegant Hongnian in the building. When he saw Brother Feng carrying Yu Huakuei out after staying in the banana courtyard for a while, he secretly praised him for his domineering attitude. When they arrived at the prince's mansion, Li Hanlin took Yan Qiji to the White Dragon house. Su Fengnian threw Yu Yue onto the big bed in the inner room. He took a handful of satin and tied her hands and feet. Still worried, he tied another layer. He rummaged through the drawers and found the jade mud powder that Li Hanlin had used in the flower field. It was of a higher level than the knockout drugs and softening powder that were commonly used by flower thieves in Jianghu. The woman would be clear-headed after taking it, but her body would be as soft as a warm jade. It would be difficult for her to commit suicide by biting her tongue, but it would not stop her from moaning. After melting it in a wine cup, he pried open Yu Yue's mouth and poured it in. After that, Su Fengnian gave her a slap. A bright red handprint appeared on her tender cheeks. She did not wake up. Su Fengnian slapped her again and finally woke her up. Yu Xuanji opened her eyes. She did not struggle or resist. She closed her eyes again and softly said something that almost made Su Fengnian fly into a rage. "His Royal Highness, move faster. I'll just pretend that I was bitten by a beast." Su Fengnian bent down and caressed her cold face that was red from the slap. He said with pity like a lover, "Does it hurt?" Yu Xuanji remained motionless. Su Fengnian did not put on any pretense. He picked up a book of erotic paintings that he had prepared in advance and drew them on silk. Accompanied by erotic words and intimate sentences, the paintings were vivid and lifelike. He flipped open one of the paintings and explained how to play with a delicate foot. Su Fengnian removed Yu Xuanji's socks. His movements did not stop as he said, the delicate foot must be in the center. The length of the foot must be perfect, and there must not be one, and there must not be two. Yue, your jade-like feet are so comfortable to touch. When winter comes, you'll be able to help me warm my bed. This leg, ah. The erotic paintings say that it has the best features of a woman's curved eyebrows, the tips of her fingers, the roundness of her breasts, the color of her lips, and the privacy of her private parts. Do you think I should play with it for an hour or two? Yu Xuanji had a pair of beautiful feet that could be said to be of the highest quality. In the 5 years since she entered the profession, she did not need to work. She soaked in fragrant baths every day and took good care of every inch of her body. Because of the instinctive nervousness caused by Su Fengnian's teasing, the backs of her feet were curved like crescent moons. Su Fengnian was indeed a man of his word. When he said he would play with her for 2 hours, he did it. Especially when he stretched out a finger and stroked between Yu Huakuei's 2 jade-like toes, he could clearly feel her suppressed trembling. Next, he climbed up and caressed Yu Xuanji's legs with the last layer of underwear between them. Her legs were slender and white. She was so elegant when she played with the sword. As expected, her legs were full of elasticity. After another hour, he did not take off his dudu to get straight to the point. Instead, he took off his clothes and lay down beside Yu Xuanji. He sucked on her earlobe. The beauty was already sweating profusely. Her eyes were hazy with tears. She bit her lip so hard that blood oozed out. Su Fengnian whispered in her ear, city gazing, sword dance, Shining Academy. I don't believe that with the power of Biyao Palace, I won't be able to uncover the secret behind your background. When the time comes, I'll destroy everything you care about. If you're alive, I'll kill you. If you're dead, I'll dig your grave. When I'm tired of you, I'll throw your corpse to the bottom of the lake. I'll ask the old Taoist of Wudang Mountain to perform a ritual so that you'll become a wandering ghost and won't be able to reincarnate. This is the consequence of going against me. Yu Xuanji's cheeks were filled with tears. Su Fengnian suddenly opened his hand and grabbed her chest. The gentleness from before was completely gone. Yu Xuanji felt a piercing pain. Su Fengnian smiled sinisterly. I'm kind enough to sell you medicine for regret. As long as you're willing to serve me until the day you're old, I'll promise you that you'll still be Yu Yue. I don't care if you're the orphan of the old officials of West Chu or a rebel trampled by the Biyao cavalry. I won't look into it. Everything will be fine. You can be my canary. In this world, is there a cage more beautiful than Biyao Palace? Yu Xuanji sobbed. Su Fengnian suddenly said, I remember now. There's also that Wu Meinyang. What a lovable little thing. How pitiful and sad. She's about to become food for the wild dogs. I'll get up now and go to the banana courtyard to pick her up. I'll chop her up in front of you and throw her to the hungry wild dogs. Yu Xuanji fainted. Su Fengnian was speechless. She fainted just like that? There's still more vicious medicine in my plan that I haven't revealed yet. I'm not done yet. Su Fengnian pinched 2 pinches of the pink jade pigeon. It was very satisfying. However, Yu Huakue was as stiff as a corpse. After touching her a few times, Su Fengnian lost interest. If it was just a beautiful body, Su Fengnian could have as many as he wanted. He sat up, put on his clothes and looked down at Yu Yue who was sleeping. The resentment in Su Fengnian's chest and the viciousness in his eyes faded a little. She's just a silly girl. It's not strange. Isn't there a Princess Taiping in the residence? Su Fengnian covered her head with a quilt. His Royal Highness had a scale for the beauty of a woman in the world. 100 copper coins, 1 tael of silver, was the limit. 60 copper coins was the average. Only those above 80 copper coins could enter Su Fengnian's eyes. In his opinion, White Fox's face could be worth 95 copper coins. He originally wanted to rate it as 1 tael of silver, but he felt that it was inappropriate. He had to leave some for himself. Jianghu was worth 90 copper coins, but she could become more beautiful in the future. Chapter 16. Yu Yue in front of him was 86-1, which was about the same as his elder sister. There were not many beautiful women and maids in the residence who were over 71, but they were not few either. Using His Royal Highness's terminology, it was not a technical job. Su Fengnian did not practice martial arts, but he did not dare to indulge in excessive sexual desires. He was very selective and would rather go without than have something substandard. His character was elegant. Su Fengnian busied himself for 4 hours. After eating some warm pastries in an exquisite food box, he regained his strength. He sat by the bed and slapped Yu Huakue awake again. He said coldly, "Do you want to eat buns made with Wu Meinyang's meat?" Yu Xuanji finally cried hoarsely. Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and said, "I'm lying to you. I might as well tell you the truth. If I want to vent my anger, I'll just go against you and your family. After I throw you into the lake, I'll take care of Wu Meinyang for you. She'll definitely be white and fat." She stared at Su Fengnian in a daze. Su Fengnian sneered and said, "When have I ever lied to you under the bed?" She felt wronged and said, "You're sitting on the bed right now." Su Fengnian flew into a rage out of humiliation. He suddenly stood up and said, "Motherf asterisk cur, I'm going to chop Wu Meinyang into minced meat right now." Just as he stood up, he heard Yu Yue say softly, "I'll be your slave. From today onwards, I'm just Yu Yue." Su Fengnian turned around and stared at Yu Huakue, who had a dead expression, and asked, "Can I trust you?" She closed her eyes and said bitterly, "Then kill me first, and then kill Wu Meinyang." Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment before releasing her hands and feet. He then moved far away from her and said, "You'll sleep here tonight. Tomorrow, I'll arrange a courtyard for you. You'll be my housewarming concubine. Don't expect a title. Without my permission, you're not allowed to walk around." She said calmly, "I miss Wu Meinyang." That night, His Royal Highness sent people to the Purple Gold House to redeem Yu Yue. Other than a white cat, nothing else was brought back to Biyao Palace. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse. The two of them slowly walked up to the platform of the Tide Listening Pavilion, a strange combination. Su Xiao and Su Fengnian had attracted the attention of White Fox. Because the deceased Wang Fei believed in Buddhism all her life, there was a square Buddhist pagoda under the majestic platform, engraved with 8 plum blossoms. The body of the pagoda was shaped like a bowl, with a boat-shaped niche in the middle. Inside the niche, there was a Buddha sitting in a lotus position with a solemn expression. At the base of the pagoda, there were 8 stone carvings of Vajra holding up the pagoda. This building was undoubtedly the feng shui of Lingzhou city. Lingzhou lacked water, so the king of Beilyang, Su Xiao, used manpower to expand the lake into a sea, meaning water pen. The listening to the Tide Pavilion was tall and majestic, built near the water, gathering the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and absorbing the essence of the sun and moon. There were 3 horizontal plaques under the eaves of the first floor of the main pavilion. In the east, there was a plaque with 9 dragons, which was bestowed by the emperor. Before entering the pavilion, De Zhugua chuckled and said, "Saving Fengnian's life in exchange for Mr. Nangong's entry is a good deal for me." White Fox's expression was as usual, and she did not answer. When the door was pushed open, a huge white marble relief of the flying fairies of Dunhuang came into view. The flying fairies in the painting were as tall as real people. Even White Fox, who had seen a lot, was stunned for a moment. The slightly hunchbacked king of Beilyang, Su Xiao, chuckled and introduced, "In the west hall of the first floor, there are 30,000 scrolls of martial arts in the world, which are not very valuable. I just collected them to occupy a place and add to the scholarly atmosphere of the 10,000 scrolls in the house. The second floor is a secret floor. In addition to the 4,000 unique scrolls of the yin-yang study, there are also 49 rare weapons in the world, which is my second daughter's favorite place. On the third floor, there are 20,000 scrolls of profound secret manuals. On the fourth floor, there are some rare stones and antiques collected in the secret floor." Fengnian always scolded it for being stinky. The 5th and 6th floors are where the Jianghu heroes who risked their lives to sneak into the king's mansion are after. I believe that ordinary masters will not be able to understand anything further. As for the top floor, it is empty. Mr. Nangong, if you want to climb up and look into the distance, you can go to the White Crane Tower at the top of the mountain. White Fox's face understood the meaning of de Zhugua's words and nodded. Su Shao narrowed his eyes and smiled. Then let's go straight to the 5th floor. White Fox's face shook her head and finally said, after going up, I may not be interested in the 60,000 scrolls on the lower floors anymore. Su Shao was not surprised. He laughed and walked up the stairs alone, disappearing into the shadows. White Fox's face stood in front of the jade screen with 2 sabers embroidered on her waist. She was in high spirits. De Zhugua arrived at the 8th floor. The bamboo scrolls and ancient scrolls were scattered all over the floor. There was a long red sandalwood table with a flickering candle lamp on it. There was a green gourd with wine in the corner. A red string was tied to the mouth of the gourd and a skinny arm. The man sat on the floor with disheveled hair. His face was as pale as snow, and there was a touch of light red between his eyebrows. If one looked closely, it looked like an upside-down red phoenix eye. He was dressed in a linen robe and sat barefoot with his legs crossed. De Zhugua Su Shao picked up a dozen bamboo scrolls and put them neatly. Only then did he have a place to sit down. He apologized, I came in a hurry and forgot to bring wine. I'll ask Feng Yan to make it up later. Su Shao was obviously used to the weirdo's silence and said to himself, I can't sleep well without a real master in the king's mansion. I hope this Nangong Poosh doesn't disappoint me. Speaking of which, it is strange. Spies have been investigating for half a year and have not been able to dig up this person's background. It seems that he can only be someone from Northern Han. Ishan, what rank do you think his current strength is? The skinny man opened his mouth, his voice like metal and stone. Secondary 1st rank. He has cultivated in the pavilion for 10 years, but there is no one above him. De Zhugua clicked his tongue and said, Feng Yan has picked up a treasure. The sickly man picked up the gourd and poured out the wine. There was no more wine. He immediately lost interest and stopped writing, his eyes lifeless. Su Shao stood up and raised his head to look at the earth immortal painting on the southern wall. With his hands clasped behind his back, he frowned and said, Ishan, Feng Yan will soon be 20 years old. For the ceremony, you should present him with a courtesy name. The man thought for a moment, Su Feng Yan, courtesy name Tianlang. De Zhugua Su Shao suddenly burst into unbridled laughter, rather proud of himself. Chapter 17. Light snow came after Lidong, but there was no snow during this season. This made His Royal Highness, who loved to drink warm wine and read forbidden books on snowy nights, very disappointed. White Fox's face had already stayed on the 1st floor of the Tide Listening Pavilion for half a day. She was in a trance, and her perseverance made Su Fengnian, who could not bear hardships, feel ashamed of his inferiority. However, this did not stop Su Fengnian from having fun in the prince's mansion. Courtesan Yu Yue settled down and lived in a secluded courtyard where 2 kinds of plants were planted overnight. The white cat, Wu Mainyang, seemed to be very satisfied with the new nest and had gained some weight. Su Fengnian gave Yu Yue the best mink fur coat and the most exquisite food, but he did not touch her smooth jade again. He deliberately kept a distance from her. That round Lu Qiu was right. Raising a human was the same as raising an eagle. They had to be trained slowly. If they were too fast, they would lose their spiritual aura. If they were too slow, they would not be obedient. Everyone in the mansion knew that His Royal Highness liked to go boating on the lake alone. Every time he reached the center of the lake, he would throw down a few things. When the weather was warm, he would dive into the lake and only resurface after a long time. It was probably because the Crown Prince was naturally close to water. Today, Su Fengnian was very interested in being a boatman. He rowed the boat to the center of the lake and muttered a few words to himself. Then, he tied a few pieces of steaming roast venison to a stone and threw them down. Then he lay down on the small boat and enjoyed the warm winter sun. He was about to fall asleep when he heard a voice calling him while he was half awake. He sat up and saw a slender woman wearing a luxurious red fur coat standing in the pavilion by the shore. Several strangers were standing near the familiar slender figure. She waved her hand vigorously. Su Fengnian was pleasantly surprised. He rowed the boat back and jumped into the pavilion. In the end, he was hugged by the woman. Her fragrant lips nibbled on Su Fengnian's face. With a face full of rouge and lipstick marks, Su Fengnian affectionately called out, "Sister." In this world, the only person who dared to flirt with His Royal Highness was the eldest daughter of the Pillar State, Su Jihu. The two siblings had been very close since they were young. Before she got married, Su Fengnian was dragged to bed with her even when he was 12 or 13 years old. If it was said that the king of Biyao, Su Xiao, was the most protective of Su Fengnian, and Su Longxiang was the most obedient, then Su Fengnian was definitely the one who doted on him the most. As soon as Su Jihu received a letter from his father saying that his younger brother had returned to the city, he immediately rushed back to his mother's home with a group of servants. With tears in her eyes, she pinched her brother's cheeks, touched his head, and rubbed his shoulders. She even slapped Su Fengnian's but heavily without any scruples. Finally, she habitually reached for her brother's crotch. Su Fengnian said with a bitter face, "Sister, it's very good here. There's no need to check it. There are outsiders." "These two people, who are they?" In the pavilion, other than the maidservants and nannies who were frightened by Su Jihu's ruthless and strange style, there were also two outsiders. They were both outstanding and handsome. One wore a green robe and held a sword, handsome and elegant. The other was tall and sturdy, with a face full of righteousness. Su Jihu smiled sweetly and pointed, "This is Cui Gongzi of the Cui family of Qinghe. His swordsmanship is outstanding." On the way, sister met some bandits who didn't know their place. It was Cui Gongzi who led the family troops to chase them away. This is Zheng Gongzi, chivalrous and righteous. He is very famous in the Guangzhou area. They are both sisters' benefactors. The two bowed together and said, "Greetings to His Royal Highness." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Since you are my sister's benefactor, then you are my benefactor as well. Do you have any martial arts techniques that you want to practice? There are quite a lot of books here. I'll get someone to bring you a few." The elegant-looking Cui Gongzi's eyes were burning, but he concealed it well and evaded. The wandering hero Zheng Gongzi, on the other hand, was not interested. Su Fengnian scolded, pretentious, and stupid, in his heart, but his expression was still warm. He said a bunch of polite words. Su Jihu did not find it boring. In her eyes, her brother was the most perfect. Even when he fell flat on his face while learning from a horse, it was still a very elegant posture. Su Fengnian waved his hand and called Jiang and I over. He had her lead the two Gongzi to walk around the mansion. Then he dismissed all the servants, leaving only the sister and brother who had not seen each other for many years. Su Fengnian said bluntly, "Sister, this Cui Gongzi's appearance is not bad, but his heart is not good. He is the same kind of person as me. Don't be cheated of your money and body. As for that Luobao, he is either really stupid or very shrewd. He is not a good person either. You can play with them, but don't use your true feelings." Su Jihu stretched out a finger and pointed at Su Fengnian's forehead. She smiled charmingly and said, "Do you think I need you to teach me? When it comes to men, I only need to glance at them to know whether the bird in their pants is big or small, good or bad." Su Fengnian held his sister's hand and picked up a tribute yellow mandarin. He peeled it and gave the sister and brother half each. Su Fengnian threw a piece into his mouth and said, "Your sister seems to be in good shape. Elder sister seems to have gained some weight. That's good. If you've lost weight, I'll go to Jiangnandao and start a massacre." Su Jihu suddenly burst into tears without any warning. Su Fengnian thought that his sister had been bullied over there. He gritted his teeth and said, "Sister, tell me, who made you unhappy? I will bring people to kill them." Su Jihu wiped her tears and stopped crying after a long time. She pulled Su Fengnian's hand and looked at the calluses on his palm and fingertips. She choked with sobs again. I know that your 3 years of travel have not been easy. In the past, you would not have been willing to swallow an entire piece of mandarin. Even if I was willing to tear off the shredded mandarin, you might not have been willing to eat it. I have never had to worry about food and clothing, so how could I have suffered? Even if I was a widow who had been stabbed in the back, to me, it was nothing more than an itch. But you have traveled for 3 years and traveled thousands of miles on foot. I don't even dare to think about it. What a heartless father. I will find him and settle the score. If he doesn't love you, you can follow me to Gangnam-do. It is rich and the girls are beautiful. Chapter 18. Su Fengnian made a pig's face, which made his sister laugh. He laughed and said, "Sister, I'm not a child anymore." Su Jihu hugged Su Fengnian and pressed his head against her chest, which all Gangnam-do men coveted. She snorted and said, "Even if you're not a child, you can still sleep with me. Don't even think about running away tonight." Su Fengnian said shyly without any sincerity, "Sister, that's offensive." Su Jihu twisted her brother's ear and threatened, "Do you believe that I won't tell everyone about your heroic deeds of wetting the bed when you were 8 years old? Also, you were lying on the same bed as me when you were 12 years old. Every time you woke up in the morning, your hand would be on me." Su Fengnian glanced at his sister's chest from the corner of his eyes. He wanted nothing more than to dig a hole and crawl into it. He said flatteringly, "Sister, let's not kill each other, okay? Come, let me massage your shoulders." Su Jihu, who was enjoying His Royal Highness's skillful massage, squinted her eyes and looked at the lake. She sighed and said, "When you came back, Huang Man, left. I don't know if it's because I left, but that girl came. The 4 of us never had a reunion." Su Fengnian asked, "Sister, when it snows, do you want to go to Wudang Mountain and enjoy the scenery?" Su Jihu smiled and said, "Since that heartless coward asked for the heavenly Tao, I'll just let him be alone for the rest of his life. I'm not so shameless as to beg him. If you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten that there was such a person." Su Fengnian said, "Oh, and didn't touch on the pot that didn't boil." Su Jihu fiercely kissed Su Fengnian's face and sweetly said, "Elder sister is narrow-minded and has a narrow vision. Therefore, as long as younger brother is around, all men in the world are vulgar things that cannot be seen." Su Fengnian pretended to be sad and said, "It's a pity that we're siblings." Su Jihu twisted his ear and scolded him, "Stupid. When a woman got married, it was like spilled water. There was heavy snow during the heavy snowfall. No matter how reluctant she was to leave, half a day of reunion passed by in a flash." Her sister, Su Jihu, finally decided to return to Gangnam-do. She said that it was snowing and that she would not be able to bear to leave if she did not leave now. That day, Su Fengnian sent him off for 30 li on horseback, and then rode alone back to the city. Returning to the Wangfu, Su Fengnian, who was in a bad mood, called his maidservant Jiang Ni and concubine Yu Yue to the lakeside pavilion to admire the snow. The surface of the lake had long been frozen, but heavy snowflakes continued to pour down, covering the vast expanse of white land. Su Fengnian shook his head, stood up, and drank a mouthful of warm wine to warm his stomach. He muttered something that no one understood, "Old Lake Kuei, don't freeze to death at the bottom." Su Fengnian turned to look at the tide-listening pavilion across the lake. White Fox's face had not shown up for a long time. Inside, she was reading the vast martial arts scroll. Was she well? Finally, he looked in the direction of Mount Wudang. Su Fengnian did not understand those martial artists who spent their whole lives pursuing the great realm of martial arts. As for those lunatics who pursued the illusory and supreme way of the heavens, he did not understand at all. He only knew that if that young Taoist who rode the green ox was willing to nod his head, his sister would be happy. Therefore, Su Fengnian did not have the slightest good impression of Mount Wudang, which had been passed down for thousands of years. His sister was narrow-minded, but he was narrow-minded. Su Fengnian poured a cup of warm wine for Jiang Ni and handed it to her. She responded with a sneer. It was true that she was the princess of a fallen country, and her master even said that she was the favored one who carried the world's fortune. However, in Biyao Palace, she was only a female servant. She had to follow the rules for food, clothing, housing, and transportation. Therefore, she shivered in her thin clothes and glanced at the fog of wine several times. Su Fengnian mocked, "You want to drink wine, but you don't want the one I gave you. You can't take it yourself either. You and I are both tired. I'm just a good-for-nothing prodigal. If you have the ability, go assassinate His Majesty the Emperor or my father. What kind of hero are you to make life difficult for me?" Jiang and I said coldly, "I'm just a weak woman. I only have a handful of divine talismans. I can only kill you. If I don't kill you, who else can I kill?" Su Fengnian was speechless. He drank a mouthful of wine and curled his lips. "Scoundrel. We're a good match." Jiang and I simply closed her eyes to rest. Yu Yue, who was holding Wu Mainyang in her arms, was very curious about the identity of this beautiful female servant. A white rainbow flew out of the pavilion. It landed in the lake not far from the tide-listening pavilion. For the first time, the white-robed white fox's face pulled out the embroidered winter, spring, and thunder blades at the same time. The embroidered winter blade was 3 feet and 2 inches long and weighed 5 kilograms. The person who made the blade did not seek sharpness. On the contrary, he sought to blunt the blade. The spring thunder blade was 2 feet and 4 inches long and weighed only 1 kilogram and 3 kilograms. Its entire body was bluish-purple. It could easily cut through heavy armor. The embroidered winter blade rolled up 1,000 layers of snow. It was as if the heavy snow in the world was moving like a shadow, slanting toward the white-robed person who was moving swiftly on the lake. It was majestic and magnificent. The spring thunder blade was cold. The ice on the lake's surface split into nearly 100 astonishingly huge grooves. The wind and snow were confusing to the eyes. Su Fengnian, who had just picked up a cucumber and was gnawing on it, froze. He stared at the person and the 2 blades in the lake as if he was looking at an immortal. Gnawing on raw cucumbers and corn was a habit he had developed after traveling back and forth for 6,000 miles. To cater to His Royal Highness's tricky taste, he had prepared many raw cucumbers that were washed but not peeled. There were also some sweet corn. It was not a small expense to play with these things in this season. Jiang and I murmured, "What a beautiful woman." Compared to the female servant who had no lethality except for a divine talisman, Yu Yue, who had roughly learned the sword and had stayed in Shangyin Academy for some years, had better eyesight. The handsome person who was moving with the blade in the lake was definitely the most outstanding bladesman. The scenery in front of her was not inferior to the sword dance she saw when she was young. The white shadow moved forward in the snow. The 2 blades were incomparably powerful. Su Fengnian took a bite of the cucumber and said cheerfully, "This is the demeanor of a grandmaster." The wind and snow in the lake suddenly stopped. A resheathed short blade was thrown out. It drew a mysterious arc and stabbed into the snow in front of Su Fengnian. This year, during the heavy snow season, White Fox abandoned a spring thunder and went up to the 2nd floor. Chapter 19. Yu Yue went into seclusion again. As soon as she stepped into the tide-listening pavilion, the surface of the lake shattered completely. Not only that, the entire lake began to sway and countless koi fish leaped out of the water. Yu Yue was in a trance. Shangyin Academy taught all kinds of things, except for ghosts and gods. However, Yu Yue did not believe that the strange scene in front of her was beyond human power. Even Jiang and I, who was used to seeing thousands of koi in the sky, frowned and could not figure out the reason. Su Fengnian pondered for a while and cursed under his breath. He threw the cucumber into the lake. The coachman Huang ran over with his hands in his sleeves. He was probably here to join in the fun. This old servant had a special status in the prince's mansion. He had no relatives or friends. However, because he had been raising horses for His Royal Highness and Second Commandery Princess for many years, even the sinister butler Shen would slow down and nod when he saw the old coachman. However, no matter who he met, Huang would always be silly and grin foolishly. Su Fengnian asked Huang to sit down. The surface of the lake had calmed down. He asked the servants to prepare a boat with a black awning and took Jiang and I, Yu Yue, and Huang to the center of the lake to enjoy the snow. Huang was not interested. Other than feeding the horses, he would steal some time to drink some wine. Therefore, he was very happy and his old face was full of smiles. Inside the boat, Huang set up the stove and added some dry wood. The wine was not yellow rice wine, but a kind of local wine from Lingzhou. It was a new wine brewed by the prince's mansion outside of the prince's mansion. There were unsightly wine dregs on the surface of the wine. It was slightly green and thin like ants. Some poor people in Lingzhou who could not afford good wine called it green ant wine. They did not pay much attention to it, but the pillar state liked it. The green ant wine became famous because of the first line of Younger Brother Appreciating the Snow, written by the second commandery princess of Biyao Palace when she was 10 years old. Green ant new fermented wine, red clay small stove. It was praised by scholars and then spread widely. Many talkers in the capital were shocked by it. For a time, there was a trend of warm green ant wine in winter. The second son of the king of Biyao, Su Shao, was Su Fengnian, Su Longxiang. Of the two daughters, the eldest was Su Jihu, and the second was Su Weisheng. The name, second commandery princess, did not sound feminine at all. She had been intelligent since she was a child. Her swordsmanship was good, and her poetry was even more amazing. She had a broad mind. When she was 16 years old, she entered the Shangyin Academy to study. She studied the classics and weathering art with Han Guzi. The only imperfection was that although second commandery princess was stunning, her appearance was ordinary. She was not as beautiful as first commandery princess and His Royal Highness. Jiang and I still did not drink because she hated the green ant wine. She hated everything related to that woman. Her hatred was second only to Su Fengnian. Yu Yue drank a few bowls, and Su Fengnian and old Huang drank the rest. The atmosphere at the Tide Listening Pavilion was tense as if they were facing a formidable enemy. De Zhugua, who was wearing a thick fox fur coat, waved his hand when he saw them boarding the boat. The 6 or 7 shadow masters in the mansion slowly retreated, and 3 of the 5 guards came out. Su Fengnian, who was drunk, pointed at Jiang and I and then at Yu Yue. He laughed and said, "You, and you, we have no grudges against each other, but you make it so that we can't live under the same sky. Kill me? Sure, Jiang and I, take out the divine talisman and I'll let you stab me. I'd like to see if my Wuxia armor is sturdier or your dagger is sharper. Why don't we make a bet? If you win, we don't need to talk about the result. If I win, you give me a smile. What do you think, Princess Taiping? Is this a good deal?" Jiang and I narrowed her beautiful eyes, eager to try. Jiang. Divine talisman. Princess Taiping. Yu Yue, whose mother was a sword attendant of the former emperor and whose father was a retired official in West Chu, trembled her hand, causing Wu Meinyang to yell lazily in her arms. Su Fengnian threw away the golden fox fur coat and tore open the lapel inside, revealing the navy blue armor that he was reluctant to take off after returning from his travels. He opened his chest and said, "Come, stab me." Jiang and I was hesitating, waiting for an opportunity like a leopard cub. Old Huang was not worried about bleeding. The eldest young master had suffered a loss because of his lack of Jianghu experience. Later, he became more and more cunning. In the end, she gave up the tempting opportunity and sneered, "You'll do a losing deal? I'd rather believe in a ghost than you." Su Fengnian quickly put on his clothes and put on the fox fur coat again. He laughed and said, Fortunately. I was so scared that I broke out in a cold sweat. As expected, I can't drink too much wine. Old Huang, go row the boat. Let's go back and save our lives from the gates of hell." Jiang Ni's eyes were full of vexation. Old Huang was happy with the young master. When they got ashore, Jiang and I left resentfully. Yu Yue did not put on the mink fur coat he sent to the courtyard. Instead, she gave her the fox fur coat that was the only luxurious one in the entire prince's mansion. She patted Wu Meinyang's head and said casually, "You learned the Fengzhou accent to fool people, but in the banana courtyard, a small test exposed you. On the boat, a half-real and half-fake Princess Taiping of West Chu hooked your fox tail. Yue, you're really not suitable to be an assassin. In the future, you should be content to be a caged canary. Look, I didn't lie to you. There's an extremely beautiful snowy scenery here. After saying this, Su Fengnian shouted the jargon of the bandits, the wind is tight, let's go. Then he ran away with his servant, old Huang. Yue, who was wearing the golden fur coat, stood in place. It was hard to tell whether she was wearing the fox fur coat or the wind and snow. In the 6th year of the Liang dynasty, on the 28th of the lunar calendar, the king of Biyao, Su Shao, and the crown prince, Su Fengnian, set out at dawn. Except for Chen Jibao and Chu Lushan, the other 4 adopted sons followed. 300 cavalrymen majestically headed for Mount Jiuhua in Kunzu. Chapter 20. Although this mountain was the place of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, the Liang dynasty had always worshipped Taoism and suppressed Buddhism. Mount Jiuhua was located in a remote area and there were no temples or Buddhas to worship. Most importantly, de Zhu Gua had deliberately expelled random believers, making Mount Jiuhua seem particularly lonely. There was a 1,000 Buddha pavilion at the top of the mountain with a huge bell on the roof. The ringing of the bell here was very particular. It was rung 108 times a day, not more, not less. There were also bells in the morning and evening. Each time, it would be rung 18 times, then 18 times, then 18 times at a leisurely pace. It was repeated twice, a total of 108 times a day, which corresponded to the 24 solar terms and 72 climates in the 12th month of the year. After the death of the princess, Su Shao, who had never taken a concubine in his life, even made up his mind to never marry again. Every year, he would personally come to 1,000 Buddha Pavilion at the top of the mountain and ring the bell in the morning and evening. Before entering the mountain gate, everyone tacitly took off their armor and dismounted. Su Shao and Su Fengnian walked side by side. The 4 adopted sons, Yuan Zuozong, Yi Shizhen, Yao Jian and Qi Danghua kept a distance, not daring to cross the line. Among the 4, Zhou Xiong was the vanguard general who could easily take the head of a general in the midst of thousands of troops. His martial arts were superb, and he was also outstanding in marching troops. Yi Shizhen was a Confucian general who was good at scheming and strategizing behind the scenes. He was the opposite of Lu Qiu, or who liked to scheme behind the scenes. Yao Jian was from a side branch of Taoism and was good at searching for dragons. He always carried a green capsule scripture of geography with him and liked to squat on the ground and chew the soil when he was free. Qi Danghua was the bearer of the Biyao cavalry's flag with the word Su. As for the head of the 6, Chen Jibao, he was known as the villain butcher. His achievements in his life could be seen from a single leaf. That night, the 6 of them stayed at the ancient temple at the top of the mountain. On the 29th day of the lunar calendar, de Zhu Gua Su Shao rang the bell 108 times. Before going down the mountain, Su Shao and Su Fengnian stood in the corridor of 1,000 Buddha Pavilion at dusk. De Zhu Gua said softly, "After your coronation, you will be the one to ring the bell in the future." Su Fengnian nodded. The mountain winds suddenly rose, and the sea of clouds drifted away in the twilight. The mountain ranges and ridges were like immortal islands in the sea. The mountain wind rose again, and they were hidden in the waves of the sea of clouds. The atmosphere was majestic. Occasionally, dozens of mushroom-shaped cloud pillars would be stirred up from the sea of clouds. They would soar into the sky and slowly fall down, turning into wisps of floating clouds. This was a unique scene of Mount Jiuhua. Su Shao stretched out his hand and pointed at the mysterious scene. Very few people can live a smooth life for decades. Ups and downs are the norm. The few officials in the imperial court who already have one foot in the coffin are no exception. Your father's glory and splendor was obtained through countless gambles, so the most taboo was for others to say that the higher one climbs, the harder one falls. He was afraid that if he fell, he would implicate the few of you and not be able to get up. Being a military general and being bestowed the title of king is already the pinnacle. Being a civil official and being a pillar of the country is also the pinnacle. This kind of monstrous honor can be counted on one's fingers in the Liang dynasty's history. In the eyes of the father and son, the scene was like the waves of the sea, like a snowball rolling on the ground. The voice of the country's pillar of the country was mellow and honest, revealing a strong flavor unique to the green ant wine. There are only you and me here, and at most your mother in heaven. There are no outsiders, so I'll be frank. Li Shan was right. It's easy to succeed, but difficult to retreat. I'm already riding a tiger and can't get off. 3 years ago, the imperial court wanted to summon you to the capital. His Majesty even wanted to betroth the most favored 12th princess to you. At that time, you would enter the capital and become the prince consort, but in reality, you would be a hostage. However, I declined and asked you to travel for 3 years and walk 6,000 miles to shut the mouth of the imperial court. But this was still a temporary solution. I'm waiting. If His Majesty still refuses to give up, humph. Su Shao killed people at the age of 10 with a knife. After 40 years of military service, he hasn't read many moral articles. At that time, don't blame Su Shao for being disloyal and unrighteous. There are 300,000 Biyao cavalry under the banner of Su Wang. Who would dare to fight them head-on? With a bitter laugh, Su Fengnian said, "Old father, I have no interest in the emperor's throne. You're already so old, don't work so hard to conquer the world so that your son can be the emperor." How foolish. If I become the emperor, it won't necessarily be more comfortable than being the heir apparent. Su Shao angrily said, "Then you're willing to be the dog fart prince consort? Like that woman surnamed you and become a caged sparrow?" Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and said, "Even if you rebel, you can't be the old emperor. Liang Di has never had the feng shui of a dragon. When has there ever been a person who unified the world?" Su Shao sighed and said, "Li Shan also said the same thing. If you were just a good-for-nothing like Li Hanlin, then father wouldn't care. There's no harm in being the prince consort. Living under someone else's roof, at least under the eaves of the imperial palace. Before your second sister went to Shengyin Academy, she told me something that hit the nail on the head. A family clan looks luxuriant and graceful on the surface, but it's useless. Most of the time, it's hollow on the inside. It's especially worrying that there won't be any successors. The more wealthy and powerful a family is, the worse it will be if each generation of descendants becomes worse than the last. That's why father isn't afraid of you squandering money. But Fengnian, you've given father a huge problem. Tell father, do you have any plans to hold the Biyao command seal in the future? When the time comes, your second sister will be the military advisor, and Huang Manor will charge and break through enemy lines for you. Together with father's 6 adopted sons, even if father dies, the 300,000 cavalry won't fall into chaos or disperse." Su Fengnian asked in return, "What do you think?" Su Shao shamelessly said, "Father is already so old, and it wasn't easy for him to accumulate such a large family fortune. You unfilial son, no matter what, shouldn't you leave father with something to remember?" Su Fengnian said boldly, "Well, that's not a problem at all. Isn't it just squandering money? That's my specialty." At that moment, De Zhuguo's hunched back seemed to quietly straighten. Chapter 21. Usually, once he got bored of the women outside, Su Fengnian would go to the tide listening pavilion to ask for advice from his master, Li Shan, or go to the second floor to search for 1 or 2 secret manuals of the secret sect, and then go back to his room to learn. But after White Fox's face settled in, Su Fengnian did not disturb this guy's closed-door training. The prince's mansion was decorated with lanterns and colored banners, and it was very festive. There were no less than 600 big red lanterns. Therefore, Su Fengnian had been fighting for justice for those assassins. Even if they were good at Qinggong and managed to sneak into the prince's mansion, it was still not easy to find Su Shao. With so many twists and turns, those with poor patience would probably jump up and down and curse. In the first month, there was an endless stream of visitors with expensive gifts, but those who were qualified to present gifts to the Great Pillar State could be counted with one's fingers. Most of them could not get past housekeeper Song Yu, and then most of them were stopped by housekeeper Shin Chun. The rest were high-ranking officials like Li Hanlin and Yan Qiji's father or family friends. These old foxes had always prepared double the gifts. It was obvious that they knew the rules of the northern young prince's residence. Unless it was a matter of national affairs, the crown prince's words were the most accurate. Su Fengnian naturally did not refuse any of them. He also called them uncle and uncle diligently, and became more familiar with the ways of the world. Lantern Festival. Su Fengnian brought a group of evil servants and evil dogs to the famous Kejia Alley in Lingzhou to see the colorful lanterns. The Lantern Festival had always been a good time to enjoy the lanterns, the moon, and the beauties. After 3 years of exile, Prince Su had gained a lot of knowledge. Not only did he master a lot of the vulgar slang of various provinces, he also heard a lot of wise sayings, such as, "Where there are women, there will be Jianghu." The number of times that Su Fengnian had fought with others for the sake of a girl could not be counted with both hands and feet. One had to count Li Hanlin, Kong Wuqi, and a few other bastards to barely count. Over the years, the number of unlucky losers who had been defeated by Su Fengnian could be grouped into several rows. The Red Sparrow's brothel, which had overshadowed the Purple Gold brothel in recent years, was located in Kejia Alley. Therefore, Su Fengnian brought along Yu Yue, saying that he would bring her to smash the brothel. Kejia Alley was extremely crowded. Those ruffians who took the opportunity to take advantage of women on such occasions all had their eyes lit up. They touched their breasts and buttocks, which showed that they were very experienced. Some daring men even shouted, "Why are you squeezing? Are you in a hurry to reincarnate with your family?" While they were pushing the women in front of them. If they were lucky enough to meet a coquettish woman in heat, they might even cooperate with them. Life was full of all kinds of weird and motley things. When Su Fengnian was young, he often did this kind of thing with Li Hanlin. However, at that time, when his sisters turned around and saw that he was an elegant and handsome youth, most of them did not care. No matter where Su Fengnian went, they automatically made a path for him. No one was brave enough to take advantage of Yu Yokue. Su Fengnian was not interested in guessing riddles, but a couple in front of him had piqued his interest. The young man was dressed luxuriously. He was wearing a bright red and gold tunic with azure and silver embroidered sleeves. There was a suet jade belt around his waist, but he did not carry a sword. The woman had a graceful figure, and her back was graceful. She did not speak much, and it was the man who did the talking. "Sister Fan, you women are all made of water, and the rest of the men are made of mud. Therefore, when I see women, I feel refreshed, but when I see men, I feel turbid and pungent. Sister Fan, when will you agree to let me eat the rouge on your mouth?" When Su Fengnian heard this, he was annoyed. "Damn it, coffin ghost," he sped up without saying anything and kicked the young master's butt. He was a weak man, so he fell forward in an instant. Su Fengnian followed and stomped on him. The young master did not have time to shout before Su Fengnian kicked him in the mouth. His extremely beautiful face was immediately covered in blood and dust. Su Fengnian did not stop moving his feet. He laughed and said, "Don't you think that a body made of mud is unbearably filthy? Aren't you also made of mud? Why don't you go hang yourself? You still want to eat a woman's rouge? Do you want to eat sh*t?" The evil slaves, who wished for the world to be in chaos, cheered loudly. They praised His Royal Highness as if he was even more vigorous and lively than the world's #1 expert. Sister Fan, who was mentioned by the handsome young master, was at a loss. Her limpid eyes widened, and she held her chest, looking delicate and pitiful. Su Fengnian was tired of stomping, so the next step was naturally to release the dogs and evil slaves. He ordered, "Throw this guy into the cesspool." The 2 evil slaves, who were used to doing dirty things, walked over with a sinister smile. They each lifted a leg and dragged the elegant and refined young master away from Kejia Alley. Sister Fan's tears were sparkling, and she said in a trembling voice, "Brother Lin was last year's 3rd place in the imperial examination." 3rd place? Su Fengnian turned to face the sickly young lady. The difference in treatment was like heaven and earth. He smiled gently and said, "Sister Fan, it's good to be the top scholar. Otherwise, you're not worthy of this young master's famous Jianghu deadly 18 kicks. The young lady seemed to be frightened. She held her chest and gasped for breath. Her face was pale. Su Fengnian originally wanted to ask where the young lady was from, but seeing the situation, he did not want to scare the young lady. He only advised her, Sister Fan, when Lin Tanhua climbs out of the cesspool, tell him to stop eating rouge. Be careful that he doesn't become the rabbit master of Fengzhou's Li Hanlin. Then, he took Yu Yue, who did not know whether to laugh or cry, and the proud evil slaves and left. When the Red Sparrow brothel heard that His Royal Highness was coming, they trembled with fear like mice seeing a cat. Su Fengnian did not enter the brothel. He only had one of the evil slaves take out a seal from the government and run over to stick it on the red lacquer door. The brothel keeper of the Red Sparrow brothel, who was known as Lingzhou's #1 brothel keeper, walked over to Su Fengnian as if her parents had died. She wiped away her tears and carefully asked, His Royal Highness, what is the reason for this? If the Red Sparrow brothel has not treated you well, Your Highness can just kick me a few times. Your Highness, please wait a moment. The Red Sparrow brothel will immediately have a few courtesans dress Your Highness. Su Fengnian sneered with a straight face. I've heard that 3 years ago when I was just a few dozen miles away from Lingzhou, the Red Sparrow's brothel celebrated without restraint until dawn. I've heard that the entire Nanhui River is fragrant. Can you drink 100 jars of fine wine? Could you earn 100,000 taels of silver? The brothel keeper explained with a sad face, Your Highness, please understand. The Red Sparrow brothel is only a small business. How could we dare to refuse a guest? Su Fengnian was amused and said sincerely, You have your difficulties. I understand, but what should be done is done. Don't worry, the Red Sparrow brothel is not the only brothel that is in trouble. Those who drank wine and sought pleasure here 3 years ago will be dealt with one by one. If the Red Sparrow brothel wants to open its doors, first chase that Lu Kei, who mocked Yu Yue, out of Lingzhou. After a year and a half, when my anger has subsided, you will be able to do business. The brothel keeper, who had learned from Gangnam-do to raise skinny horses to make money, still wanted to plead, but His Royal Highness impatiently turned around and left. He only turned his head and smiled at the awake Yu Huakue. Did you vent your anger? Yu Huakue had learned from her ancestor, Li Yuanyuan. She left the brothel when she was at her most attractive. Her oval-shaped face was slightly plumper as she hugged Wu Mainyang, who had gained 5 to 6 caddies in just one winter, and did not say anything. On the way to the Lion Bridge by the Nanhui River to admire the lanterns, His Royal Highness, who was ignorant and incompetent, quietly asked, Yue, just now I wanted to describe the actions of those bastards in the Red Sparrow brothel as a celebration. Is it appropriate? Yue's eyes flashed with the subtle scene of green ants on the surface of a new bottle of wine, but her tone was very calm as she said, It's not appropriate. Su Fengnian was pleased with himself, fortunately. Lingzhou's 13-hole Lion Bridge was almost synonymous with Kajia Alley. There were 3 strange things about this bridge. The first strange thing was called the Lion Bridge. However, the railings and observation posts were carved with hundreds of beasts and thousands of birds, and only a lion was missing. The second strange thing was that the body of the bridge was made of white jade, so there would always be people with hammers and iron hammers who wanted to break some jade pieces and chisel some jade powder to sell for money. As a result, the Lion Bridge had strong bridge watchers with a semi-official status standing at the head and end of the bridge all year round. The third strange thing was that there was a strange rumor that an immortal had ascended on a dragon from the bridge. Su Fengnian saw that Yu Yue was a bit tired from carrying Wu Mainyang, so he took her and held her in his arms. The fat and exceptionally lovable white cat was not willing to act coquettishly in front of its master's master. Even its cold expression was exactly the same as Yu Yue's. Su Fengnian, who was holding a stick of sugar-coated haws, didn't mind. He took a bite and suddenly asked, What do you think that young master who loves to eat rouge can't swim? If he's covered in feces and urine, how is he going to go home after getting out of the manure pit? Yu Yue didn't want to answer this question, especially since she was still holding a sweet dish of carved phoenix with syrup in her hand. Su Fengnian's thoughts went astray. It didn't matter whether that young master could swim or not, because he was standing in a latrine pit and wouldn't crawl out even if he was beaten to death. He didn't want his fairy-like Sister Fan to see a Lin Tanhua covered in feces. Sister Fan stood not far away and frowned, persuading him with soft words. It wasn't until the Lantern Festival ended that she finally convinced Lin Tanhua to crawl out of the latrine pit. As for how he would go back, it would be another period of bitterness that he was destined to never be able to remember. This unexpected calamity caused Master Lin, who was supposed to visit his family's elder the next day, to postpone his visit by nearly half a day. When he finally mustered up the courage to go out and meet them, he found out that the elder, who had a very shallow relationship but held the court's first-class official weapon, had already left the city to patrol the border. Thus, he simply took Sister Fan to Mount Wudong to relax. Chapter 22. Hibernation. Spring thunder sprouted, all living things awakened, and hibernating insects broke out of the ground. The scenery of Biyao Palace wrapped in silver was incomparably beautiful. The prince's mansion in the warm spring was also charming and gentle, with thousands of pink trees, peaches, and white pears, overflowing with spring. At noon, Su Fengnian came to the lakeside alone. He rowed a boat to the center of the lake, took off his outer garment, took a deep breath, and jumped into the dark green lake. This lake was flowing water, far clearer than ordinary lakes. Su Fengnian held his breath as he dove into the lake, but he was still some distance away from the bottom. He resurfaced and dove again. After repeating this 3 or 4 times, he was completely confident that he could reach the bottom of the lake. Only then did he continue to dive. The lake was rather deep. Logically speaking, a slightly deeper lake should be completely dark and unable to see anything. However, the mystery lay in the fact that this lake regularly removed silt. At the center of the lake, there was a huge luminous pearl that shone as bright as day. Su Fengnian held his breath as he hovered at the bottom of the lake. The scene in front of him was enough to be written into any fairy tale that would leave the common people speechless. A water kuei, about 3 meters tall, sat cross-legged in the silt. Its white hair was like seaweed, slowly swaying in the wind. The water kuei, with its eyes closed in meditation, had a robust physique. Through the light emitted by the luminous pearl the size of a goose egg, one could vaguely see that the water kuei's left hand and legs were bound by 3 iron chains as thick as arms. At the end of the chains were 3 iron balls weighing several thousand jin. Was there any prison in the world that was more unimaginable and cruel than this? The water kuei opened its eyes without any emotion. It looked at the only living person it had seen in more than 10 years. Su Fengnian made a hand gesture, roughly indicating that he would throw the cooked meat down later. The huge monster opened its mouth and sucked a koi into its mouth. It directly tore at the koi, causing its blood to seep out of its mouth. In a few moments, the fat red koi was swallowed whole. Su Fengnian's face turned from red to green. He couldn't hold on for much longer. After a moment of hesitation, he made a series of hand gestures that only he and Hu Kuei could understand. The old man, who looked more like a demon than a living person, widened his eyes and stared at Su Fengnian with sharp eyes, as if he was doubting and judging something. After being isolated from the outside world for so long, the old man's thinking was very slow, but Su Fengnian couldn't wait any longer. With a whoosh, he rushed up, or else he would die young and float on the surface of the lake. Climbing onto the boat, Su Fengnian wiped his body and put on his clothes. There was a stove in the boat, so it was quite warm. Su Fengnian waited for a moment, but the surface of the lake was as calm as a mirror. Su Fengnian felt a little regretful, so he retracted his gaze and glanced at the spring thunder dagger given to him by White Fox. Placing it on his knees, he stroked the scabbard and sighed, "Daughter of Spring Thunder, it seems that you have no place to use your skills. That old man is willing to stay down there like a coward. Let's see if I will still give him meat to eat in the future." When he was young, Su Fengnian had cramps while playing in the water and almost sank to the bottom of the lake. The old man, who ate live fish at the bottom of the lake day after day and year after year, did not swallow Su Fengnian alive. Instead, he used his supernatural power to lift His Royal Highness out of the bottom of the lake. Since then, Su Fengnian had developed the habit of throwing cooked meat into the lake as a way to repay his kindness. When he was in a bad mood, he would also dive to the bottom of the lake and look at the old man sitting at the bottom of the lake. He would feel that life was actually very beautiful. At first, he thought that the old man was a demon who was punished by the heavens, but when he grew up, he realized that he was a human who also needed to eat. However, Su Fengnian couldn't figure out how to breathe under the lake for more than 10 years. Wouldn't he suffocate to death? Then what realm did his inner strength reach? For this reason, Su Fengnian specially went to the Tide Listening Pavilion and flipped through the ancient martial arts books about holding one's breath. He only found the 2 words, embryonic breathing, in a Taoist secret scripture that corresponded relatively well. However, Su Fengnian was no stranger to Mount Wudong. He had never heard of any expert on the mountain who could achieve such a wonderful, black tortoise fixation. His Royal Highness, who did not have a good impression of Taoist priests, believed that the Taoist scriptures, pulse stops, qi stops, embryonic growth begins, and, if you want to live forever, your spirit and qi must converge, were just words used by the immortals to deceive the world. His master, Li Shan, had clearly said that there were no ghosts or gods in the world. The limit for a Taoist priest was to abstain from eating for 3 years. There was absolutely no possibility of ascending to immortality. His Royal Highness, who had left in high spirits but returned in disappointment, carried the spring thunder ashore. He took out his saber and chopped off 4 or 5 willow branches full of yellow buds. He wrapped them around his head and swung the spring thunder back and forth in a leisurely stroll. Outside the prince's mansion, a handsome man with a face as delicate as a peach petal threw himself at the nameplate. The gatekeeper of the prince's mansion had long trained his discerning eyes. He immediately weighed the weight of the nameplate in his hand. He lowered his head and took a closer look. It was the young master of the Lin family from the Qiao kingdom of Hedong. This family was not considered a first-rate aristocratic family in the dynasty, but it had some connections with the prince's mansion. The Lin family's eldest son originally had the opportunity to marry the eldest princess, so the gatekeeper did not dare to neglect him. He withdrew his initial coldness and smiled slightly. He asked the young master to wait for a moment and immediately went to report. The young master of the Lin family had become a scenery along the way. Her delicate body could not be considered extremely beautiful, but the aura she exuded was a rare charm in the valiant cold land. It was unknown whether it was because she was weak or because she was walking too fast, but her smooth forehead was covered in sweat. The young master of the Lin family felt sorry for her, but he really did not have the courage to mention it to the housekeeper of the mansion. The Lin family from the Qiao kingdom of Hedong was not at the top of the county. Compared to the colossus of the Biyao palace, they were not even worth mentioning. As the saying goes, the prime minister's gatekeeper is a third-rank official. Even though he had taken 3rd place in the imperial examination last year and had seen all the flowers in the capital with the top scholar and 2nd place on horseback, when he came to the Biyao palace, he did not dare to be arrogant. Chapter 23. The 2nd-ranked steward led them to the Phoenix Rites Pavilion and walked along the lakeside path. As a result, the 3rd-ranked steward saw someone he definitely did not want to see. That person slowly walked over. He was wearing a fox fur coat and looked extremely wealthy. However, he wore a willow headband and was playing with a simple dagger. To be able to stroll around in the strict hierarchy of Biyao Palace, it was His Royal Highness, who spent all his time reading forbidden books. When Su Fengnian saw Lin Tanhua, who had been thrown into the cesspool, he gave the steward a look to keep quiet. He quickened his pace and said with a smile, "Third ranker, have you come to eat rouge? Did you not eat enough during the Lantern Festival?" Lin Tanhua, who did not know Su Fengnian's background, asked timidly, "You are?" Su Fengnian deliberately put on an arrogant and disgusting look and said with a pretentious face, "I am His Royal Highness's study partner." Lin Tanhua, who originally thought that he had met a local tyrant of an aristocratic family during the Lantern Festival, was relieved. His expression was awkward. Although the bastard in front of him was not a descendant of a rich family, he was close to His Highness. Even if Lin Tanhua did not know much about worldly affairs, he still knew the pros and cons. Before he could react, the study partner, who was using his connections to bully others, had already taken a few steps forward and looked straight at Fan Mimi. He completely ignored Lin Tanhua and said softly, "Mimi Fan, it's fate." Let me take you on a tour of the prince's mansion. At the tide listening pavilion, you can see tens of thousands of koi fish jumping over the dragon's gate. After saying these polite words, Su Fengnian reached out to hold Fan Mimi's small hand. Lin Tanhua, who was full of heroism, quickly stood between the two and glared at them. Su Fengnian smiled and threatened her softly, "You who eats rouge, don't fail to appreciate my kindness. Since I'm His Royal Highness's study partner, it wouldn't be difficult for me to feed you 6 or 7 boxes of rouge. Or, if I put in a little more effort, it's possible that you'll be rejected. Think about it." The man who came in third was pale. It was rare for him to act like a man. He refused to move, which made Su Fengnian have a whole new level of respect for him. The elegant Miss Fan sighed softly. She squeezed out a smile and comforted, "Brother Lin, it's fine. I've long wanted to see the scenery of the tide listening pavilion." Su Fengnian walked forward with the beauty in tow. He quietly hooked his finger and called the second-class steward to his side, instructing, "Tell Su Xiao not to show himself. Let's wait for 3 or 4 days." The steward, whose back was facing the young master and young mistress, said flatteringly in a low voice, I know. It definitely won't affect His Royal Highness's important matters." Su Fengnian said softly, "I'll reward you later." The steward smiled like a flower. "Thank you for your reward, Your Highness." Su Fengnian patted him on the shoulder and led Fan Mimi, who was like a lamb in a tiger's den, to the embankment across the lake. He even took the initiative to put the willow ring on her head and threw a look of protest at the grief-stricken Lin Tanhua. On the embankment, which was named Colorful Z, there were many orioles and swallows brushing past Su Fengnian. They were just as quick-witted as the steward. With just one look from Su Fengnian, they knew that His Royal Highness was starting to tease the freshly minted girls again. Biyao Palace not only had many servants, but there were also quite a number of officials who had received favors from the Great Pillar State. Each of them worked like an ox or a horse for the king of Biyang's residence in Wutangan, where Su Fengnian lived. The female servants were divided into 4 classes. There were 2 first-class maidservants. One of them was naturally fragrant and specialized in warming His Royal Highness's bed. The other was in charge of raising snow-white spear falcons for Su Fengnian. There were 4 second-class maidservants. One of them was skilled in poetry, calligraphy, and was especially good at writing beautiful characters. She was in charge of adding incense to His Royal Highness's bed. The other 3 had also been strictly influenced by music and singing since they were young. The third-class maidservants were in charge of simple chores such as watering the flowers and setting up the tea stove. The fourth-class maidservants were in charge of menial chores such as cleaning the courtyard. Of these women, other than the first-class maidservants who were in charge of warming His Royal Highness's bed, the rest of them were all around 71 in beauty. If Su Fengnian wanted to eat rouge, he could eat until he was full at any time. As if feeling depressed, Fan Mimi softly asked, "Does young master use the blade?" Su Fengnian shamelessly said, "I have diligently practiced the blade for 10 years. My blade skills are only at a small level." In order to prove that he had practiced the blade for many years, Su Fengnian performed a mighty sweeping move. In the end, he accidentally threw the spring thunder, which almost fell into the lake. Fan Mimi smiled and considerately tilted her head to look into the distance. Su Fengnian picked up the sacred weapon of the blade that had met with an unworthy owner. He didn't feel embarrassed at all and explained that it was an accident. When they arrived at the base of the tide listening pavilion, Fan Mimi looked at the 3 plaques under the eaves. One was the 9-dragon plaque inscribed by the late emperor, the other was the plaque, Grand and Magnificent, written by great masters, and the other plaques, with a phoenix coming, and fighting bull. On the contrary, she wasn't particularly moved by the beautiful sight of koi fish tossing bait. It was quite different from the young ladies and daughters who had been abducted by Su Fengnian in the past. Su Fengnian thought that it would be better if it was different. Always eating shark's fin and bird's nest would spoil his appetite. Occasionally eating autumn base and winter bamboo shoots would whet his appetite. Just as Su Fengnian was enjoying the beautiful appearance of the girl beside him, a strange phenomenon occurred. The lake water began to boil and undulate, exactly the same as that snowy day. Su Fengnian was pleasantly surprised. He waved his hand and had a servant lead the shocked Fan Mimi to the Phoenix Rites Pavilion. He also ordered everyone at the lakeside to leave. After doing all this, Su Fengnian hurriedly ran to the small ferry where the black awning boat was parked. Carrying the spring thunder saber that could cut iron like mud, he jumped onto the boat. Just as he was about to row the boat, he saw old Huang swaying his old body as thin as a bamboo pole and rushing over. He was even carrying the long cloth pouch that had once caused Su Fengnian so much suffering. Inside it was a rosewood box that was nearly 4 feet long. Su Fengnian rolled his eyes. What was this old Huang doing? What if the old man at the bottom of the lake turned hostile and refused to recognize him? Would the master and servant compete to see who could escape faster? After old Huang boarded the small boat, Su Fengnian rowed to the center of the lake. His palms were sweaty. His Royal Highness had always been a good gambler. This time, he was going to bet big. Chapter 24. If Su Fengnian said that he was not afraid at all, he would be lying to himself. However, Su Fengnian believed in his intuition. The old man who had been trapped at the bottom of the lake for more than 10 years would not make things difficult for him. After all, they had interacted for so many years. Su Fengnian had thrown countless chicken drumsticks and barbecued meat into the lake. He would dive down every few days during spring and summer to get familiar with the old man. No matter what, they had a bit of friendship. Su Fengnian did not mention this matter to his father, Su Shao. He believed that both father and son were well aware that Su Fengnian was at most grateful for saving his life. Even if he released this trapped monster from the lake, if Su de Zhugua became angry, he would at most be whipped. Moreover, Su Fengnian was also curious about the strength of the capable people in Biyao Palace. He also wanted to know if the old man who could survive for more than 10 years was a master on the level of the top 10 masters in the world. Su Fengnian pretended to be calm and said, "Old Huang, do you know what I'm going to do? Why are you following me? Can you swim? Don't drown." The old servant smiled shyly and did not say anything. He seemed to feel that the bag was heavy. He shook his small body and lifted the wooden box a few inches. When he reached the center of the lake, Su Fengnian pulled out the purple spring thunder from the simple scabbard that was not as beautiful as the embroidered winter. He took a deep breath and threw the blade down with all his strength. After a while, there was still no movement. Su Fengnian almost cursed out loud. He thought to himself that it wouldn't be like drawing water with a bamboo basket again, and that he would have to jump down to retrieve the saber. Old Huang slowly moved to the bow of the boat and did not move at all. Su Fengnian said helplessly, "Old Huang, don't pretend to be an expert in front of me. Do you think I don't know how strong you are?" Old Huang turned his head and laughed. Su Fengnian glared at him and said, "What are you laughing at? You think you're so great because you don't have front teeth?" In an instant, the rise and fall of the lake was more intense and terrifying than any of the previous waves. It was as if the world was about to be turned upside down. Hiding in the boat, Su Fengnian's first thought was to call for old Huang to retreat. Then, of course, he would let his father's men clean up the mess. He was His Royal Highness, who could even make spring thunder attack with total annihilation, so he couldn't be so stupid as to compete with old man. But very quickly Su Fengnian sensed the strangeness of the small boat with the black awning. The waves on the lake were frightening, but the old coachman, who had been traveling for 3 years and would run away whenever he encountered danger, lightly stamped his foot, and the swaying boat instantly became as solid as a boulder, motionless. Old Huang did not forget to turn his head and grin. He stretched out his hand and gestured that he was about the same height as Su Fengnian. The general meaning was that he was a master of this height. Su Fengnian did not know whether to laugh or cry. "Old Huang, you still have the mood to be carefree right now. Don't wait until you're beaten up by old man. You don't have front teeth to begin with." A gray figure leapt down from the winding corridor on the 3rd floor of the tide-listening pavilion. He landed on one foot and with a bounce, his figure gracefully swept into the lake. Su Fengnian subconsciously raised his hand, only to find that there was no cucumber in his hand to chew on. He felt a bit regretful. A good show was about to begin. The Tide Listening Pavilion was what the people of Jianghu referred to as the armory. There were 5 servants guarding the pavilion. Su Fengnian had been familiar with them since he was young, so much so that he would find a corner to pee in when he needed to. He called them uncle and grandpa politely. The person guarding the 3rd floor of the Tide Listening Pavilion was a Taoist master. He was the founder of the Way of Judami, one of the 3 great orthodoxies. According to his master, Li Shan, he was proficient in Chimen Duanjia. He was a genuine second-stage mystic enlightening cultivator. He was only willing to enter the pavilion as a servant for the sole copy of the Deed of Thorough Comprehension in the Tide Listening Pavilion. When Su Fengnian was young, he was tired of climbing stairs and often had the old man carry him. The old Taoist of Judami wore a gray wide-sleeved Taoist robe. After jumping into the lake, he gracefully dashed forward like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. He rolled up his sleeves and sent 2 water pillars straight to the center of the lake. Su Fengnian was relieved to see that the boat was not capsized. He clicked his tongue in wonder and said, "Grandpa Wei's skills are so formidable. If I had known, I would have brought him along on my travels. Those bandits would have been beaten to a pulp." When old Huang heard His Royal Highness's words, he turned his head with a bitter expression on his old face. Su Fengnian did not want old Huang, who had been running around with him for 3 years, to be sad. He smiled and said, "No matter how powerful Grandpa Wei is, he can't be compared to you, old Huang, who can steal birds' nests and fish. There are many masters in this world, but old Huang is the only one who can weave straw sandals." The old servant smiled tenderly, giving Su Fengnian goosebumps. He hurriedly said, "Let's watch the show. Don't miss it." Both the master and servant looked towards the lake. 2 jet-black chains broke through the water like flood dragons emerging from the sea, full of momentum. At the end of the chain, there were 2 hiltless swords. One of the swords was as clear as snow, and the other was as red as blood. In the words of His Highness the Crown Prince, the swords were very attractive. At first glance, one could tell that they were masters of martial arts. Su Fengnian did not have a large stack of banknotes on hand. Otherwise, he would have shouted, "You deserve it." The 2 blades broke through the 2 water dragons that old Taoist Mi had sent out, shattering them on the spot. The 10 feet tall Xiong Kuei's body rushed out of the lake. Without the restraint of the copper balls at the bottom of the lake, the white-haired Xiong Kuei who appeared out of nowhere laughed wildly, almost breaking Su Fengnian's eardrums. With a swing of the chains, he drew an arc in the air. The scarlet blade chopped towards the old Taoist. The blade's momentum was peerlessly tyrannical. It cut through the air, bringing with it a whistling wind. Old Taoist Wei lightly shouted. He stepped on the water with 1 foot, stirring up 1,000 layers of waves that shot towards the long blade. The waves were cut in half. The huge blade was like a hot knife through butter. The old Taoist shook his sleeve, attempting to block this biting cold blade that he had never seen before in his life. However, it was futile. The wide sleeve of his Taoist robe was instantly shattered. He was defeated in 1 move. Chapter 25. His figure flew backward and fell into the lake. No one knew if he was dead or alive. It turned out that the old man in the lake also carried a blade. Both he and Bai Huer had 2-handed blades. One blew snow and the other raised waves. Which one was more powerful? Su Fengnian, whose eyes were blurred, clicked his tongue and said, "Is this old man invincible? If I had known that masters were so powerful, I would have listened to Su Zhao's advice and practiced martial arts." Old Huang turned his head and shook his head with a silly smile. "Not invincible, not invincible." Su Fengnian looked at him attentively. He saw that the chains on the old man's hands were rooted in his bones and connected together. It was not an ordinary binding. This was too terrifying. Who would be so obsessed with martial arts and conceited to the point of becoming one with the blade? What if the blade was controlled by someone? Wouldn't it be extremely painful? Old Kuei leaped into a pavilion with 2 locks and 2 sabers. He waved his sabers lightly, and the pavilion, which had cost him quite a lot of silver, collapsed with a loud rumble, almost turning into fine powder. Old Kuei looked up to the sky and laughed loudly, his white hair fluttering in the wind, making him look like a llama. The remaining 4 guards of the tide listening pavilion moved together. They formed a triangle and stood far away with a solemn expression. On the top of Mount Qingliang, de Zhugua, Su Shao, sat on a wooden bench and looked at the lake on the mountainside. He held a red clay teapot made by a famous craftsman, but it was filled with green ant wine. Beside him stood his adopted son, Yuan Zhuozong. Zhuoxiong squinted his phoenix eyes. Su Shao chuckled. How many moves can you block? Yuan Zhuozong, who was riding a white horse and wielding a silver spear and killing people on the battlefield, said softly, Father, Zhuoxiong wants to try. De Zhugua shook his head. Forget it. Someone will take care of this monster downstairs. He can't hurt Feng Nian. In the corridor on the 2nd floor of the tide listening pavilion, a man in a white robe stood in front of the railing with a winter blade at his waist. He looked at it for a moment, then put his finger on the hilt of the knife and pushed it out an inch, then retracted it back into its sheath. He rubbed it back and forth, then turned around and went back upstairs. Not only that, even Li Yishan, the most important advisor of the prince's mansion, walked out of the dark room. He clasped his hands behind his back and quietly observed the once-in-a-decade spectacle. As if the sunlight was too dazzling, he raised his hand to cover his eyes and muttered to himself, Jian Zhouhuang, Chu Kuangnu, do we have to tear down countless pavilions again? The old man did not pay any attention to the guards. In this world, there were very few people who could make him take them seriously. He only roared, Ninth brother Huang, come out and die. Su Fengnian was shocked, Old Ninth Huang. Old Huang, are they calling you? Don't tell me you have a grudge with this old man. Old Huang reached out and tore off the tattered cloth, revealing the long rosewood box that made Su Fengnian's heart palpitate. He turned his head and smiled. He still looked like he had no front teeth. Every time Su Fengnian saw this scene, he always wondered if the old servant would let the wine leak into his mouth when he drank the yellow wine. The old man obviously saw the old coachman standing at the bow with the box on his back. His white hair danced in the wind and his face was ferocious. When Su Fengnian was so nervous that he did not even dare to breathe, Old Huang reached out his withered hand and stroked the wooden box. He did not forget to turn his head and smile foolishly. He raised his head and made a gesture of pouring wine into his mouth, saying, Young master, that? Su Fengnian laughed angrily, look at you. Don't you have the demeanor of a master? If you really win by stepping on dog shit, I'll treat you to 100 jars of Dragon Cliff sunken vat yellow wine. The coachman, who was called Old Ninth Huang by Old Kuei and Jian Zhouhuang by Li Yishan, smiled faintly. In that instant, Su Fengnian's eyes seemed to be dazzled. Old Huang was no longer simple and foolish. Instead, it was replaced by an indescribable feeling. He only felt that this old servant, who was as immovable as a mountain, was actually more arrogant than Old Kuei, who carried a saber. Among the 3 large plaques in the tide listening pavilion, one of them was, Qi Rush Fighting Bull. It referred to the supreme sword aura that existed only in ancient records and was in fact purely illusory. Su Fengnian thought that if this old Huang really knew how to wield the sword, he would be worthy of a big white, 2 big whites, and even 1,000 big whites. What a scoundrel. Old Huang didn't move, but the wooden box hummed like a dragon's cry. It wasn't ear-piercing, but it shook one's soul. Su Fengnian was dumbfounded. Could it be that this old Huang who had been stealing chickens and touching dogs with him for 3 years was really an expert? Sword 1. Old Huang, who had been silently reciting these 2 words, stepped lightly on the bow of the boat. Su Fengnian's small boat with a black awning moved back toward the shore. It was abnormally stable. The small boat gently glided backward, creating ripples in the water. Su Fengnian gazed at Old Huang's skinny figure in the distance as he walked on the waves. The side of the red sandalwood box opened, and a long sword rushed out of it. De Zhugua, who had stood up on the mountain peak, and Li Yishan, who was in the tide listening pavilion, said at the same time, Sword 1, Dragon Snake. The old man with the blade laughed impudently, good, good, good. Old Ninth Huang, I've been waiting for you for so many years. Today, Grandpa will break your 9 swords and let you have one less sword to carry. Su Fengnian, a layman, was so annoyed that he wanted to kill someone. He knew that this was a peak confrontation between the top experts of Jianghu, but in his eyes, it was just a blade against a sword. He couldn't see anything special about it. It was even less exciting than the duel between the old man with double blades and Grandpa Wei. The only thing he could see was that another sword had flown out of the red sandalwood box. Su Fengnian didn't know that even the best moves couldn't escape the 4 words, back to basics. De Zhugua forgot to drink. He held his wine cup and sighed softly, sword 2. Li Shan, who was in the Tide listening pavilion, slowly spat out 2 words, twin lotus flowers on one stalk. The 2 on the mountain and halfway up the mountain clearly had a tacit understanding. 1 sword became 2 swords, 2 swords became 3 swords. Sword 3. 3 Jin. 3 swords filled the sky with sword light, enveloping the world. Old man with double blades and Old Huang with 3 swords. They were practically half gods and half immortals. Su Fengnian sat down on the boat and laughed foolishly, you deserve a reward. These are all F** king top-notch skills.